Sir, please stop. You dropped your lighter. Annie's voice rang out just as Marcus Whitmore had taken a few steps down the stairs. Annie took a few quick steps forward, the silver lighter resting across both of her palms. Mr. Whitmore. But Marcus had barely turned back when the security guard moved in front of him. Carl Benson caught Annie by the wrist before she could come any closer. Hey girl, he said, his fingers tightening. Put that lighter down before someone thinks you stole it. Annie tried to pull her hand back, but Carl didn't let go right away. He left the lighter at his seat a few minutes ago, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Carl stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then you should have handed it to the front desk. I was trying to catch up with him, Annie said, pulling harder. I was only trying to give it back. Marcus Whitmore's eyes moved from Carl's hand to Annie's face, to the lighter she was still holding out. Carl turned quickly. Sir, please let me handle this. The guard looked annoyed. You followed Mr. Whitmore out of the lounge carrying his personal property? The guard reached for the lighter. Hand it over. Annie held it out. I didn't steal anything, she said. I didn't say you did. You didn't have to. The guard's face changed. You need to watch your tone. Before Annie could answer, Marcus spoke from behind him. Carl. The guard turned at once. Sir, I was just handling. Move. It was not loud. Carl stepped aside. Marcus Whitmore walked back toward Annie. That's mine, he said. Yes, sir. Annie extended it. You dropped it under the chair. Marcus looked at the lighter, then at Annie. His expression did not soften. Thank you, he said coldly. Marcus took the lighter, and as his fingers closed around it, the cuff of his white shirt slid back from his left wrist. There was a tattoo on his skin, a broken phoenix. Every line of ink was sharp and deliberate. Every missing angle in the tail feathers, every wounded curve of the wing, every proud but sorrowful shape of that firebird looked exactly the same. Not similar, not close, identical down to the smallest line Annie had traced with her eyes since childhood in the worn old notebook her dead mother had left behind. The notebook was the only thing Clara Brooks had given her. Now the drawing from that notebook was on Marcus Whitmore's wrist. This tattoo. Annie's voice shook so hard she barely recognized it. She pointed before she could stop herself. Who drew that for you? Marcus's eyes narrowed. What did you just say? Annie's finger remained fixed on his wrist. Her mouth went dry. This, she stammered. This is my mother's drawing. Carl stepped forward at once, outrage. How dare you behave like that? He snapped. Do you have any idea who he is? Who are you to point at Mr. Whitmore like that? Annie flinched. I'm sorry, she whispered. It's just, that tattoo can't be mistaken. Marcus lifted his hand slightly. How do you know this tattoo was drawn by someone? His voice dropped low, full of warning. No one in this world knows that except me and the person who drew it. Who are you? Who sent you here to spy on me? Annie raised her head. I'm not a spy, she said, choking on the words but holding his gray eyes. But that drawing, it belonged to my mother. The billionaire's hand froze. If you wanted my attention, you have it, Marcus said. And if your intention was to irritate me, you've succeeded. Annie swallowed. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated, but her mother's phoenix was on his skin. My name is Annie Brooks, she said. Clara Brooks was my mother. Sir, she said, her voice softer now. That drawing is still in my mother's notebook. Marcus's lips parted, but no answer came at first. Then he whispered one word. Clara. Behind Annie, the VIP lounge kept moving. Now the richest man in Georgia was standing in front of her with her mother's secret marked into his skin, and somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the anger, beneath the old ache of missing Clara, Annie felt the first sharp pull of a question she could no longer bury. Marcus only looked at the notebook tucked under Annie's arm and said, There's a private sitting room at the end of this hall. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I'm on shift, she said. Marcus looked toward Carl. Then she is on assignment for me. Carl straightened. Yes, sir. Annie turned on him. I don't work for you. No, Marcus said. You don't. That is why I'm asking. 5 minutes, she told herself. Then home. In the private sitting room, Annie remained standing near the door. Marcus noticed, but did not tell her to sit. May I see the notebook? He asked. Annie's hand tightened around it. No. His eyes moved to her fingers. I won't take it from you. That's what people say right before paperwork proves they can. A brief shadow passed across his face. You have reason to think that. My mother died poor, Annie said. Whatever reason I have, she paid for it first. Your mother's full name was Clara Denise Brooks, Marcus said. Annie did not answer. She was part of the Whitmore Fellowship in 1999, he continued. Engineering track. She was supposed to be there for 2 years. She lasted 7 months. I just don't understand, Marcus said, his gaze dropping to the notebook as if the answer might be sealed inside it. Clara was a genius. She would never have let her daughter end up working a night shift like this. My mother didn't let anything happen to me, Annie snapped. Marcus looked up. She didn't abandon anyone. She was destroyed. Annie's voice rose before she could stop it. Your rich family pushed her until there was nowhere left for her to stand. My mother died poor, and my grandmother scrubbed floors so I could grow up. Marcus did not move. Annie wiped at her face with the back of her hand, angry that she had cried in front of him. So don't stand there wondering why Clara Brooks's daughter is serving coffee at night. Ask what kind of people made sure Clara Brooks never got to be who she was supposed to be. Marcus looked at the window. I met Clara in a lab my mother's foundation funded. I was 26, too proud of my last name and too young to understand how much damage people could do while calling it protection. Clara was the smartest person in that building. Not the loudest, not the most polished, the smartest. She never told me about you, Annie said. Marcus nodded as if the words had weight. I'm not surprised. That hurt more than Annie expected. Why? Because she wanted to forget? No, he said, because if she remembered me the way I remembered her, it would have hurt too much to explain. Annie looked away first. Marcus reached for the lighter, then stopped before touching it. She drew the phoenix on a napkin the first night we stayed late in the lab. A storm had knocked the power out on the east side of the building. The emergency lights were on, and she said the place looked like it was holding its breath. She was trying to solve a heat transfer problem everyone else had dismissed. I told her the model was broken. She said, broken doesn't mean finished. Then she drew that bird and wrote under it, even broken wings remember the sky. So you got it tattooed, Annie said. 2 weeks later. Why? Marcus looked at her then, fully. Because I loved her. My mother wasn't some story for you to keep on your wrist, Annie said. She was real. She got sick. She worked double shifts. She cried when she thought I was asleep. So don't sit there and make her sound like a pretty tragedy. You're right, he said. She was real, and I failed the real woman, not the memory. If this moment touched your heart, please like this video and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you want to hear more emotional and inspiring stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. What happened? She asked. Marcus exhaled slowly. There was a project. An early framework for adaptive energy distribution. Clara's mind was all through it. My family's foundation claimed it belonged to the fellowship. Then there was an accusation. Missing files, unauthorized copies, a lab incident that damaged equipment. I was told she had taken the work, taken money, and left Atlanta with someone else. Annie felt the blood leave her hands. Who told you that? My mother, Richard Caldwell. A few others who had every reason to sound certain. Did you ask Clara? Annie stared at him. You didn't. I tried to reach her. But did you look her in the face and ask? Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. No. Annie opened the notebook before she meant to. She wasn't a thief, Annie said. I believe you. You believe me now because the truth walked up to you in a hotel uniform. Marcus flinched, just slightly. Annie shut the notebook. My grandmother said your family knows how to turn a black woman's truth into a white man's paperwork. Evelyn said that? Annie's eyes narrowed. You know my grandmother too? I met her twice. She hated me both times. She had good judgment. Yes, Marcus said. She did. A knock came at the door. Carl's voice followed. Mr. Whitmore, Mr. Caldwell is on the line. He says it's urgent. Marcus's head turned sharply toward the door. Richard Caldwell? She asked. Marcus opened the door halfway. Tell Richard I'll call him back. Carl glanced past him at Annie. He said it concerns the girl. Marcus's voice went cold again. Do not call her that. Carl stepped back. Marcus closed the door and turned to Annie. I need to see that notebook, he said. No, Annie replied. Annie, no, you can ask, you can explain, you can even regret whatever you want. But this book is the last thing my mother left me, and I'm not handing it to the family that took everything else. Marcus absorbed the words. Then he nodded once. Then keep it, he said. But let me help you find out why Richard Caldwell is afraid of it. She wanted to say no. Instead, she asked the only question that mattered. If you loved my mother, she said. Why did she die, believing nobody would ever clear her name? Marcus had no answer, and that was when Annie knew 5 minutes had become something much larger. Annie left the private sitting room with the notebook pressed under one arm, and Marcus Whitmore's unanswered silence following her down the corridor. Denise was waiting near the service door with a stack of folded napkins she had no reason to be holding. Her eyes went to Annie's face, then to the closed door behind her. What happened in there? Denise asked. Nothing I understand. That man doesn't call people into private rooms for nothing. Annie wanted to tell her about the tattoo, about the way Marcus had said Clara's name, about Richard Caldwell calling the moment Annie's mother came back into the room through a drawing. But the words felt too large for a hallway where servers were carrying coffee and guests were asking for extra towels. I need to go home, Annie said. Denise lowered her voice. Your shift isn't over. I know. Then let me clock you out before somebody else does it with a story attached. That was Denise's kindness, wrapped in hotel rules. Annie nodded once and went through the service corridor. Past the dish station and the stainless steel counters. Past the trays of untouched desserts waiting to be thrown away. She changed out of her blazer in the locker room and stared for a moment at her name tag in her hand. Annie Brooks. 2 words printed in black plastic. Easy to remove. Easy to replace. Her mother's name had been removed from something larger, and nobody had even had to look her in the face to do it. Outside, Atlanta had cooled into late evening. Annie missed the bus by half a block. She watched the red taillights pull away from the curb and closed her eyes, breathing through the frustration. The next one would come in 26 minutes if it came on time, which it rarely did after 10. She stood under the shelter with 3 other tired people, 1 man in a warehouse vest, a woman in scrubs, and an older gentleman holding a paper grocery bag against his chest. Nobody spoke much. That was the language of late buses. People too worn out to complain because complaining cost energy too. Her phone buzzed. It was a reminder from the pharmacy app. Refill delayed. Insurance review pending. Annie almost threw the phone into the street. By the time she reached the small house south of downtown, the porch light was flickering again. She had asked the landlord to fix it twice. He said he would get to it. People always said that when the broken thing did not affect their own steps in the dark. Inside, the house smelled faintly of Vicks, old wood, and the chicken soup Annie had left warming on low. The television was on, volume turned down, casting blue light over the living room. Evelyn Brooks sat in her recliner with a quilt over her knees, her Bible open but unread on the side table. Her breathing sounded rougher than it had that morning. You're late, Evelyn said without looking up. I missed the bus. That hotel work you like so much keeping you past hours now? I don't like it. Good. I'd worry if you did. Annie set her tote on the kitchen chair and went to the stove. She stirred the soup, checked the pill organizer, washed her hands, then brought a bowl to Evelyn with 2 crackers on a napkin. Evelyn took the bowl with both hands, but her fingers trembled. You take the evening pills? Annie asked. I'm old, not helpless. That's not an answer. Evelyn gave her a look over the rim of the bowl. Yes, ma'am. Annie almost smiled. Almost. Then she saw the notebook sticking halfway out of her tote, and the night pressed back into her chest. Evelyn noticed. Old women who had survived hard lives noticed everything worth hiding. What happened? She asked. Annie stayed standing. I met Marcus Whitmore tonight. The spoon stopped halfway to Evelyn's mouth. The room changed so quickly Annie felt it in her skin. The soft television light. The hum of the refrigerator. The little click of the wall clock over the kitchen doorway. Everything stayed the same, but Evelyn did not. Her shoulders tightened, her eyes sharpened. For a moment, she did not look sick at all. Why would you meet that man? He came into the VIP lounge. He dropped a lighter. I tried to give it back. Evelyn set the bowl down. And? He has a tattoo. Evelyn's face closed. A phoenix, Annie said. Broken wing, same as Mama's drawing. Sit down. I don't want to sit. Annie. No, Grandma, not tonight. Annie pulled the notebook from her tote and held it against her chest. He knew her. He knew Mama's middle name. He said she was in the Whitmore Fellowship in 1999, engineering track. He said he loved her. Evelyn turned away, but not fast enough. Annie saw the pain before the anger covered it. That man has no business saying your mama's name. Why? Because people like him can afford memories. We had to afford rent. That's not an answer. It's the only one you need. Annie stepped closer. He said Richard Caldwell lied. He said Mama was accused of taking a project. He said he tried to reach her. Evelyn laughed once, dry and bitter. Tried. That's a rich man's word. It means he made an effort, until the effort became inconvenient. Annie heard Marcus's silence again when she had asked if he looked Clara in the face. Maybe. But you know more than you're saying. Evelyn picked up the bowl again, then put it down because her hand shook too hard. I know enough to tell you to stay away from Whitmore men and Whitmore lawyers. Mama wrote Richard took the wings. Marcus never knew. Evelyn's eyes snapped to the notebook. Annie saw it then, not surprise. Recognition. You've read that line before, Annie said. I saw your mother write plenty of things after that family was done with her. What does it mean? It means pain makes poets out of people who needed lawyers. Grandma, Evelyn coughed, deep enough that Annie forgot her anger for a second and reached for the water glass. Evelyn took a sip, waved her off, and leaned back with her eyes closed. When your mama got that fellowship, she thought the world had finally opened a door, Evelyn said. She bought one good skirt from a thrift store and ironed it every night like it was silk. She'd leave before sunrise, come home with grease on her sleeves and numbers written on her hands. She was happy in a way I didn't trust. Because of Marcus? Because of all of them. I cleaned floors in that building. I saw how they smiled at Clara when she solved their problems, then looked through her when donors walked in. I saw Mrs. Victoria Whitmore look at my daughter like Clara had stepped on a rug she wasn't worthy to touch. Annie sat down slowly. Evelyn's voice lost some of its anger and became something worse, something tired. I told Clara not to fall in love with that boy. I told her a rich white family in Georgia might fund your future, but they won't let you marry into theirs without making you pay first. But she loved him. Yes, Evelyn's mouth tightened. And he loved her, maybe. But love that needs permission from cowards is not protection. Annie looked toward the window. A car passed, headlights sliding over the wall, and across a framed photo of Clara holding Annie as a baby. Clara looked thin in the picture, but her smile was real. What happened to the project? Annie asked. Evelyn did not answer. What did they take from her? Her name, Evelyn said. That was the first thing. Once they took that, everything else got easier. Annie felt the words settle into her. Did Marcus know about me? Evelyn went still again. The silence was too long. Annie's heartbeat changed. Grandma, you need to eat something, Evelyn said. No. Did Marcus know I existed? Evelyn reached for the quilt and pulled it tighter over her knees. Her eyes were wet now, but her voice was hard. There are questions that don't heal anything. That means yes or no, and you're afraid to say which. It means I kept you safe. From my father? The word came out before Annie could stop it. Once it was in the room, neither of them could pretend it had not been spoken. Evelyn closed her eyes. Don't you do that. Don't you take one tattoo and one sad story from a man in a fine suit and build yourself a father out of it. I'm asking you for the truth. I gave you the truth that kept you fed. You gave me silence. I gave you a childhood. Annie stood, anger and grief twisting together. No. Mama gave me that. You helped. But if he was part of my life and you cut him out, I deserve to know. Evelyn's hand went to her chest. Annie stopped. Grandma, I'm all right. You're not. I said I'm all right. But she was breathing too fast. Annie grabbed the pill bottle from the side table, checked the label, then reached for her phone. Evelyn tried to wave her off. Don't call anybody. We don't need another bill. I don't care about the bill. That's because you're 18. Annie called the nurse line anyway. While she waited through the recorded menu, Evelyn watched her with an expression Annie could not read. Love, fear, guilt, Maybe all of it. The nurse told Annie to bring Evelyn in if the chest pressure did not ease within the hour. Annie knew what that meant. It meant hope it passes, because the emergency room would cost more than they had. After the call, Annie brought a blanket from the bedroom and tucked it around Evelyn's shoulders. For a while, neither of them spoke. The anger did not leave, but it sat down beside worry, and worry was heavier. At last, Evelyn said, "Clara made me promise not to let that family near you." Annie looked at her. Why? Because by the time she knew she was carrying you, she didn't trust anyone with the name Whitmore attached. Did she trust Marcus? Evelyn's lips trembled. She wanted to. That was the problem. Annie sat on the edge of the coffee table, close enough to hear the small rattle in Evelyn's breath. "Grandma, I'm not trying to hurt you. I know. But if Mama was wronged, I can't just keep serving coffee under the same name that buried her." Evelyn reached out and touched Annie's cheek, her palm dry and warm. "Baby, justice sounds holy until powerful people hear you asking for it. Then they call it trouble." Annie covered her grandmother's hand with her own. "Maybe I'm tired of being quiet so they can stay comfortable." Evelyn looked at her for a long time. And in that look, Annie saw the whole history of women who had survived by choosing silence, when speaking could cost them everything. "Then don't go alone," Evelyn said. "Who am I supposed to go with?" Evelyn turned her head toward the little table by the window. "There's a man named Samuel Reed. Used to work security at Whitmore Industries before they pushed him out. He came by after your mama died. Left a number. I kept it in the Bible." Annie went to the table and opened the Bible with careful hands. Between Psalms and Proverbs was a folded church bulletin, yellowed at the edges. A phone number was written across the back. Under it, in Evelyn's handwriting, were 4 words: "If Annie ever asks." Annie looked back. Evelyn's eyes were closed now, but she was not asleep. "I hoped you never would," she whispered. Annie held the paper in her hand, feeling the weight of another door opening. Outside, the porch light flickered against the dark, failing and trying again, failing and trying again. This time, Annie did not look away. By morning, the phone number from the church bulletin was still on Annie's kitchen table, weighted beneath a salt shaker so the ceiling fan would not move it. She had not called Samuel Reed. Not yet. Evelyn had slept badly, waking twice with a cough that made Annie sit up straight on the couch, shoes still on, ready to dial 911 no matter what the bill would do to them. By sunrise, Evelyn's breathing had eased, but the fear remained in the room like a guest nobody had invited. Annie made oatmeal because it was cheap, and because Evelyn could swallow it without much effort. She sliced half a banana over the top, poured coffee for herself, and tried not to look at the orange prescription bottle on the counter. 3 pills left. The pharmacy app still said insurance review pending, as if those words could lower a fever or open an airway. "You got work tonight?" Evelyn asked from the recliner. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn looked at her over the rim of her mug. "Don't yes, ma'am, me when your face is saying no." Annie rinsed the spoon longer than necessary. "I don't know. You call that man Reed?" "Not yet." "Why?" "Because the second I call him, all of this becomes real." Evelyn set her mug down carefully. "Baby." It became real the minute Marcus Whitmore turned his wrist. Annie wanted to argue, but her phone buzzed before she could. The hotel number appeared on the screen. For one foolish second, she hoped Denise had covered for her, that the night could be reduced to a misunderstanding and a warning. She answered with the voice she used for supervisors, polite enough to hide fear. "This is Annie." "Annie Brooks?" It was Mr. Harlan, the evening operations manager. "We need you to come in before your shift today. Human Resources wants to speak with you." Her stomach tightened. "Is this about last night?" "There was an incident involving a VIP guest's personal item. I returned it. I'm not discussing it over the phone. 3 o'clock. Use the employee entrance." The line went dead. Evelyn watched her. "They firing you?" "They said HR wants to talk. That means they already wrote the ending and want you there to listen." At 2:30, Annie put on her hotel uniform with the same care she had used the night before. White blouse, black vest, black slacks, flats polished with a paper towel. She tied her hair back and pinned on her name tag, Annie Brooks. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and tried to see someone who did not need this job so badly. She failed. Before leaving, She placed Evelyn's pills beside a glass of water. Take the blue one at 4. Not 5. 4. I raised your mama and you. I can read a clock. Then read it at 4. Evelyn's mouth twitched, but her eyes softened. Hold your head up in there. I always do. I know, that's why they notice. The bus ride to downtown Atlanta felt longer than usual. Annie sat near the front, the notebook in her tote. Samuel Reed's number folded inside it. Every few blocks, the city changed faces. Small houses with chain-link fences, tire shops, fast food signs, new apartments with names like the Meridian and the Sutton, glass balconies shining above streets where people waited for buses in work shoes. Atlanta was good at building over old pain without removing it. At the employee entrance of the Whitmore Grand, the security guard checked her badge longer than he needed to. Not Carl this time, but another man who had clearly heard enough to look at her twice. Mr. Harlan met her outside HR. He wore a gray suit and the tired expression of a man who liked rules because rules allowed him not to choose courage. Annie, he said, opening the door, have a seat. Inside, Miss Pritchard from Human Resources sat with a folder already open. She smiled like the conversation had been rehearsed. Thank you for coming in. Annie sat, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Am I being written up? Miss Pritchard glanced at the folder. We're placing you on temporary suspension pending review. For returning Mr. Whitmore's lighter? For removing a guest's personal property from the VIP lounge without following proper chain of custody procedure. Annie stared at her. Chain of custody? It was under a chair. The issue is not whether you intended harm, Miss Pritchard said. The issue is perception, guest confidence, and procedural exposure. There it was. Not theft, not truth. Perception. A clean word that could wear gloves while doing dirty work. Mr. Whitmore knows I gave it back, Annie said. He saw me. Mr. Whitmore's office has not filed a complaint. Then why am I suspended? Mr. Harlan shifted. Miss Pritchard folded her hands. Because the incident was observed by other guests and staff, and because you left your assigned station for an unauthorized interaction with a high-profile guest. Annie felt the old heat rise in her chest. If I had left the lighter on the floor, you'd say I was careless. If I handed it to the desk, someone could have taken it. I gave it back to the man who dropped it, and now that's wrong too. No one is saying you acted maliciously. No, you're just making sure it sounds like I might have. Miss Pritchard's smile thinned. You'll be contacted after the review. Until then, you are not to enter guest areas or contact any hotel guests regarding this matter. Annie stood before her knees could betray her. Do I get paid during the review? The silence answered. She nodded once, because crying would give them something else to file away. I understand. She walked out through the employee corridor, past laundry carts and crates of bottled water, past a banquet cook eating fries from a paper tray. Denise caught up to her near the lockers. They suspended you? Annie kept moving. Pending review. Lord. Denise lowered her voice. Carl's been talking. Saying you followed Mr. Whitmore like you had something planned. Annie stopped. He grabbed my wrist. I know. Did he put that in his story? Denise looked away. Annie laughed once, sharp and humorless. Of course not. Annie, listen to me. Don't fight them alone. People like this, they don't have to prove you stole something. They just have to make everybody tired of asking. Annie thought of Samuel Reed's number. Pain can tell you where to look, but only evidence can make powerful people listen. When she exited into the afternoon heat, a black sedan was parked near the curb. A woman in a navy suit stepped out. Miss Brooks? Annie's body went guarded. Who's asking? My name is Lydia Grant. I work for Mr. Whitmore's office. The woman held out a card but did not step too close. He asked me to make sure you got home safely. I ride the bus. I understand. Then you understand I'm not getting in that car. Lydia lowered the card. He also asked me to give you this. She handed Annie a sealed envelope. Annie did not open it. Is it money? No, a written statement. Mr. Whitmore confirms that you returned his lighter and that he has no complaint against you. He thought your employer might need that in writing. Annie took the envelope despite herself. My employer already decided what they need. Lydia's face changed slightly, not pity, but recognition. Then keep it for yourself. Annie put the envelope in her tote. Tell Mr. Whitmore I didn't ask him to fix this. He knows. No, he doesn't. Men like him think a letter can clean up what people like Carl leave behind. Lydia did not defend him. Would you like me to tell him exactly that? Annie looked at her. Yes. Then I will. The bus ride home was crowded. Annie stood most of the way, one hand gripping the rail, the other pressed against her tote where the notebook, Samuel's number, and Marcus's statement sat together like three different versions of trouble. At the pharmacy, she asked again about Evelyn's refill. The clerk typed, frowned, and said the insurance approval had not come through. How much without it? Annie asked. The clerk told her. Annie stared at the number on the little screen. It might as well have been a mortgage. I can do 3 pills, she said. The clerk's expression softened in a way Annie hated, because softness did not lower prices. I'll see if there's a discount card. Annie left with 3 pills in a white paper bag and $4 in her checking account. At home, Evelyn was asleep in the recliner, the television showing an old courtroom show with the volume low. Annie placed the medicine on the table and sat on the couch without taking off her shoes. For the first time all day, she let her face fall into her hands. She did not cry long. There was not enough time for that. The house phone rang. Annie lifted her head. Almost nobody called the house phone except medical offices and bill collectors. She answered quietly so Evelyn would not wake. Brooks' residence. A man's voice came through. Older, low, careful. This Annie Brooks? Yes. My name is Samuel Reed. Your grandmother left me a message this morning. Annie turned toward Evelyn, who still appeared asleep except for one hand resting near the arm of the chair, too deliberately still. Samuel continued, Miss Evelyn said you found the phoenix. Annie's fingers tightened around the receiver. She told you that? She didn't have to tell me much. I've been waiting 18 years for somebody in that family to ask the right question. Annie looked at the notebook on the table, at Marcus's sealed letter, at the prescription bag with only 3 pills inside. What question? She asked. Samuel's voice hardened, not at her, but at the memory. Who profited after Clara Brooks was ruined? He said. You want the truth, Miss Annie. That's where we start. Samuel Reed did not ask Annie to meet him at Whitmore Tower, or at a law office, or anywhere that required her to walk through a metal detector under someone else's camera. He told her to come to New Hope Baptist on Campbell Street after the Wednesday evening prayer group, and to bring the notebook only if she felt ready. Annie almost told him she did not feel ready for anything. Instead, she said, I'll be there. Evelyn opened her eyes as Annie hung up the phone. You were awake, Annie said. I'm old, not dead. You called him. I did. You told me not to go near this. I told you not to go alone. Evelyn shifted in the recliner and winced. There's a difference. Annie wanted to be angry. But the anger had too many places to go and no clear road. She looked at the 3 pills in the paper pharmacy bag, then at her grandmother's swollen feet beneath the quilt. I got suspended today. I figured. Pending review. That's what they call it when they want you gone but still want to sound decent. Annie sat on the arm of the couch. Marcus sent a letter saying, I returned the lighter. Good. I didn't ask him to. Better. Annie frowned. How is that better? Means he knows the truth doesn't need your permission to stand up. That sounded like something Clara might have said. And for a moment Annie could not look at her grandmother. The house felt too small for all the dead things suddenly speaking. New Hope Baptist sat between a laundromat and a closed beauty supply store with sun-faded posters in the windows. Annie had grown up in that church basement eating spaghetti from paper plates during fundraisers, listening to older women say, bless your heart, in tones that could mean comfort or warning. By the time she arrived, the prayer group was letting out. Men in short-sleeved dress shirts held doors for women with canes. Someone had left a foil-covered pan of peach cobbler on a folding table. The air smelled of coffee, furniture polish, and old hymnals. Samuel Reed was waiting in the last pew. He was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s, broad through the shoulders, though age had drawn him inward a little. His suit was dark, his tie plain, his shoes polished. He stood when Annie approached, not quickly, but with the manners of a man raised to show respect, even when his knees objected. Miss Brooks, he said. Mr. Reed? Yes, ma'am. She did not know what she had expected. A retired security man, maybe someone hard, suspicious, impatient. Samuel looked like the kind of man who would fix a loose handrail before anyone asked and remember exactly who had been standing where when trouble began. My grandmother said you knew my mother. I did. His eyes moved briefly to the tote on her shoulder. Not as well as I wish I had. Well enough to know when a lie was being dressed up for company. Annie sat at the end of the pew. Samuel remained standing until she did, then sat a careful distance away. She said you came after Mama died. I did. Miss Evelyn wasn't ready. She's never ready. She just decides what the rest of us are allowed to survive. Samuel gave a small nod, not quite a smile. That sounds like her. Annie pulled the notebook from her tote but kept both hands on it. You said we start with who profited after my mother was ruined. We do. Then say it. Samuel looked toward the stained glass window above the side door, where late light colored the floor in dull red and blue. Your mother was in the Whitmore Fellowship. Back then, it was supposed to be the clean face of the family. Scholarships, labs, mentorships, all those words rich people use when they want their money to look baptized. Clara was different. Most students came in hoping to impress somebody. Your mother came in to solve things. Annie's grip tightened. Marcus said she was working on adaptive energy distribution. She was. They didn't call it Phoenix then. Clara called it a recovery framework. She believed small energy systems could reroute load under stress instead of failing all at once. Hospitals, airports, emergency shelters, places where one outage could kill people. That was her mind, practical, human. Annie glanced down at the notebook. The strange arrows and broken wing drawings seemed less strange now. What happened? Files disappeared. A prototype failed during a donor demonstration. Then a lab fire damaged one testing bay. Not a big fire, but enough smoke and water damage to bury what needed burying. Within 48 hours, Clara was accused of unauthorized access and removal of proprietary documents. She didn't do it. No. You know that? I know the security log was wrong. Annie looked up. Samuel leaned forward, forearms on his knees. I supervised the overnight security staff. The night before the prototype failed, Clara's badge was recorded entering Lab C at 11:43 p.m. But I saw her leave the building at 9:12. I remember because it was raining hard and she had a paper bag over her hair, laughing like the sky had personally offended her. Marcus Whitmore walked her to the door. Was there camera footage? There was. Then there wasn't. Richard Caldwell? Samuel's jaw tightened. His office requested the tapes as part of an internal legal review. By the time anyone asked again, the tapes had been overwritten. That's convenient. That's how money sins. Conveniently, Annie sat back. In her head, she saw Clara at 20-something, young and brilliant, laughing in the rain with a paper bag over her hair. It hurt to imagine her mother happy. It hurt worse to know someone had noticed and still not saved her. Why didn't you say anything? I did. To who? My supervisor. Then to Caldwell himself. Annie stared at him. You went to Richard? I was younger than I am now and still believed facts made men honest. Samuel's mouth hardened. Caldwell thanked me for my diligence. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned to a storage facility outside the city. Lower pay. Worse hours. My wife was sick then. I had 2 kids in school. I kept my job because fear is not always cowardice. Sometimes it's a mortgage. Annie looked away. She wanted heroes to be clean. Life kept handing her people who had survived instead. Samuel seemed to understand. I should have done more. I've had 18 years to know that. Why now? Because your grandmother called. Because Marcus Whitmore's name and Clara's name are in the same sentence again. Because if Caldwell is nervous enough to move this fast, something he buried is close to the surface. Annie opened the notebook. She turned to the last page and showed him the line. Richard took the wings. Marcus never knew. Samuel read it once. His face did not change, but his hand closed into a fist on his knee. She wrote that after she came back to your grandmother's place. He said, You saw it? No, but I saw Clara one time after the accusation. She came to the building to collect personal items. Miss Evelyn was with her. Clara looked like someone had taken the future out of her hands and told her to apologize for dropping it. Annie's eyes burned. Did she say anything? To me? No. To Caldwell? Yes. Samuel paused long enough that Annie felt the church grow quiet around them. She said, You can take my badge, Mr. Caldwell, but you cannot make my hands forget what they built. Annie looked down at her mother's handwriting. He took it anyway. Yes. Her work moved into Whitmore archives. Parts of it reappeared years later under different project names. Phoenix 1 is just the latest version. Annie heard Marcus's voice from the sitting room. Clara was a genius. She would never have let her daughter end up working a night shift like this. What am I supposed to do? She asked. I'm 18. I don't have a lawyer. I don't even have a job now. Samuel reached inside his jacket and took out a folded envelope. You start by keeping copies. He handed it to her. Inside were 2 photocopied pages, yellowed with age. One was an old security shift note with Samuel's signature. The other was a handwritten timeline. I kept those? Annie asked. I did. Not enough to clear her then. Maybe enough to point us somewhere now. Where? Helen Carter. She was administrative secretary for the fellowship. If letters moved, if files were rerouted, if Caldwell had a quiet channel. Helen saw the paper. Is she alive? Yes. Retired. Lives in Decatur with her daughter. Scared of her own shadow when it comes to Whitmore, last I heard. Annie slid the papers back into the envelope. And if she won't talk? Samuel looked at her with a sadness that felt practiced. Then we ask why an old woman is still afraid of a lawyer after 23 years. Before Annie could answer, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen. Unknown number. For a second, she thought it might be Marcus. But the message was from no name at all. You should stop digging before your grandmother loses more than sleep. Annie's stomach turned cold. She showed Samuel. The old man read it, then stood slowly, the carefulness gone from his face. When did this come? Just now. Did you tell anyone you were meeting me? No. Samuel looked toward the church entrance. Through the glass, a dark SUV sat across the street with its lights off. Annie followed his gaze. Her first instinct was fear, sharp and simple. Then came anger, steadier and more useful. They're watching me? Samuel took out his phone. Maybe. Don't look at it too long. Annie looked anyway. All her life, power had been something distant. Names on buildings, bills in envelopes, rules written by people who never had to obey them. Now it sat across the street in a dark vehicle, close enough to see the church door. Samuel dialed a number. Marcus Whitmore needs to know Caldwell is already moving. I didn't say I trust Marcus. You don't have to trust him to use the fact that Caldwell fears him. Annie put the notebook back in her tote, but she kept the old security note in her hand. The paper was thin, almost fragile. Still, it had survived longer than the lie was supposed to allow. Samuel spoke into the phone, low and controlled. This is Reed. Tell Mr. Whitmore the girl got a threat. Yes, I said girl because that's what they called her before they made the mistake of proving she matters. Annie watched the SUV across the street start its engine. It pulled away without headlights for half a block, then merged into traffic like it had never been there. Samuel ended the call. You still want the truth, Miss Annie? She thought of Evelyn's pills, Clara's notebook, Marcus's tattoo, the text on her phone, and the hotel office where suspension had sounded cleaner than accusation. Yes, she said. Samuel nodded. Then tomorrow we go find Helen Carter. Annie stepped out of the pew and looked once at the cross above the pulpit. She had not prayed much since her mother died. That night, she did not ask God to make things easy. She only asked that the people who had buried Clara Brooks had not buried everything deep enough. By the time Marcus Whitmore's car stopped outside New Hope Baptist, the last of the prayer group had left, and the church windows had gone dark except for one office light near the back. Annie stood beside Samuel Reed under the small awning, her tote pressed against her side, watching the black sedan idle at the curb. Marcus stepped out without a driver opening the door for him. That small act did not impress Annie, but she noticed it. Men like him usually had other people touch handles first. His eyes went to her face, then to Samuel. Where is the message? Annie held up her phone. Right here. Marcus did not reach for it. May I? She handed it over. He read the threat once, and whatever softness had been in his face when he spoke, Clara's name disappeared. You should stop digging before your grandmother loses more than sleep, he read quietly. Samuel watched him. That sound like anyone you know? Marcus gave the phone back to Annie. It sounds like someone who wants her frightened but not yet harmed. That means they're warning before they're ready. Or before they think she is, Samuel said. Annie looked between them. Don't talk about me like I'm not standing here. Marcus turned to her at once. You're right. That was becoming one of the strangest things about him. He corrected himself faster than men with less power. Do you know who sent it? Annie asked. No, but I know who benefits if you stop asking questions. Richard Caldwell. Marcus did not deny it. Samuel folded his arms. Miss Annie and I are going to see Helen Carter tomorrow. Marcus's jaw tightened. Helen Carter is still alive? Alive and scared. Last I checked. She worked in the fellowship office, Marcus said, more to himself than to them. If Clara sent letters, Helen would have logged them. Annie caught the word. Letters? Marcus looked at her. After Clara left the program, I wrote to her. Not once. Many times. Annie stared at him. You never said that. I didn't know if I had the right to say it yet. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's the truth I had ready because it was easier than the answer. Samuel made a low sound that might have been approval or warning. Marcus continued. I wrote to the address I had. Then to your grandmother's old address. Then through the foundation office when Richard told me Clara had requested all correspondence go through counsel. I received one letter back. What did it say? His face hardened, but not at her. That Clara wanted no further contact. That what happened between us had been a mistake. That she had moved on. Annie felt the notebook grow heavier against her hip. And you believed it? I was 26 and angry and humiliated and trained from birth to think the world came to me with accurate reports. He looked down the empty street. So yes, I believed what I wanted to be too proud to question. Annie should have hated him more for that. Instead, she hated how human it sounded. My mother never talked like that. No, Marcus said. She didn't. For a moment, none of them spoke. Across the street, traffic moved along Campbell. Ordinary headlights passing over brick storefronts and closed doors. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed outside a barber shop. The city had no idea that one dead woman's name was beginning to move again through people who had once failed her. Marcus looked at Samuel. I can arrange security for Miss Brooks and her grandmother. No, Annie said immediately. Marcus turned back. You received a threat. I also received suspension, gossip, and a rich man's letter I didn't ask for. Every time your world touches mine, I lose something. He took that without flinching. Then tell me what help doesn't cost you your dignity. The question caught her off guard. Annie looked down at the sidewalk. Her first answer was none. No help from him. No help from Whitmore money. No help that could later be twisted into proof that she had wanted something. Then she thought of Evelyn breathing in that recliner, pretending chest pain was a bill they could ignore. My grandmother needs medicine, she said, hating every word. And probably a doctor. A real one. But if you pay for it, people will say I sold you a story. People already know how to lie, Marcus said. Let them learn to be embarrassed by evidence. That sounds easy when your name is on buildings. It isn't easy, he said. But it is possible. Samuel stepped in before Annie could answer. If you want to help, do it clean. No cash. No favors under the table. Put it through a patient assistance fund or a charity account with documentation. Miss Annie gets copies of everything. Marcus nodded. Done. Annie looked at Samuel. You had that answer ready. I'm old, Samuel said. I don't improvise where lawyers are concerned. Marcus reached into his coat and took out a card. He did not hand it directly to Annie. He offered it to Samuel first, as if understanding she needed distance. This is Lydia Grant's direct number. She'll coordinate medical arrangements only with Annie's approval. Annie took the card from Samuel, not Marcus. That small boundary steadied her. Marcus said, Tomorrow morning I want you both at Whitmore Tower before you see Helen Carter. No, Annie said. Annie, no. We are not walking into your building so Richard Caldwell can know every move before we make it. Marcus glanced at Samuel. Samuel nodded. She's right. Marcus looked irritated, but not offended. Then where? Public place, Samuel said. Busy. Early. Busy enough that nobody wants to make a scene. Annie thought of a diner near the hospital where nurses ate before shift change and old men argued over coffee. Peachtree Diner, she said. 7:30. Marcus gave a short nod. I'll be there. And no entourage, she added. No entourage. No Carl. A brief coldness crossed his face. Carl will not be near you again. Annie wanted to believe that. She did not let herself. The next morning, Annie arrived at Peachtree Diner wearing jeans, a clean blue blouse, and the same flats from work. She had slept 3 hours. Evelyn had pretended to sleep until Annie left, then called after her to take a jacket even though the Georgia morning was already warm. Peachtree Diner smelled like bacon grease, coffee, and syrup. The booths were red vinyl cracked at the edges. A waitress with silver hair called everyone honey and meant different things by it depending on how they behaved. Annie chose a booth near the window. Samuel arrived 5 minutes later, carrying a folder under one arm. Marcus arrived at exactly 7:30. Alone, the room noticed him. It would have been impossible not to. He did not belong among truckers, nurses, retirees, and a boy doing homework over pancakes. But he did not act as if he needed the room cleared. He took the seat across from Annie and Samuel, ordered black coffee, and waited until the waitress left before speaking. "I spoke with Lydia," he said. "Street Catherine Medical Center. Can evaluate Miss Evelyn today. No admission without Annie's consent. No billing in her name without written review. Copies to Annie and Mr. Reed." Annie studied him. "Why Street Catherine? It has the best cardiac unit in Atlanta. And you own it?" "No. I sit on a donor board. That gives me access, not ownership. Rich people have a lot of words for ownership." Samuel made a sound into his coffee. Marcus accepted the hit. Fair. Annie did not thank him. She could not yet, but the tightness around her ribs loosened slightly. Samuel opened his folder. "Now, Helen Carter." He slid a printed page across the table. It had an address in Decatur and a phone number. She lives with her daughter. Doesn't answer unknown calls. We go in person. Polite. No pressure. Marcus looked at the address. "She may not speak if she sees me." "She definitely won't speak if she sees you first," Samuel said. "Annie and I go to the door. You wait in the car." Marcus's pride flickered. Then he nodded. Annie watched him. "You're not used to waiting outside, are you?" "No." "Good practice." For the first time, Marcus almost smiled, but it disappeared before it became one. Samuel tapped the table. "There's something else. If Helen confirms the letters were routed through Caldwell's office, we need the archive logs. Not copies Richard can clean. Original logs." Marcus said. "Whitmore Foundation archives were moved twice. Some records are in the tower, some in off-site storage. Who controls access?" Marcus's silence answered. Annie leaned back. "Richard." "Yes. Then by now he's already moving things." "Not if he doesn't know exactly what we're looking for," Marcus said. Annie thought of the threat on her phone. "He knows enough." The waitress returned with coffee and looked at Marcus. "You eating, sir?" Marcus glanced at Annie's untouched menu. Annie said, "Don't wait on me. I'm not hungry." The waitress looked at her with the blunt wisdom of someone who had raised children. "Baby, hungry or not, you look like you need eggs." Annie blinked. Samuel chuckled softly. Marcus said, "3 breakfasts, please, whatever she recommends." Annie frowned. "I can pay for mine." "I didn't say you couldn't." The waitress pointed her pen at Marcus. Smart answer. When she left, Annie looked out the window. Across the street, morning light hit the glass of downtown buildings, turning them bright enough to hide what happened inside them. Her mother had walked into one of those buildings believing talent would protect her. Annie knew better now. Talent needed witnesses. Truth needed copies. And courage, she was beginning to understand, needed breakfast, whether it wanted it or not. After they ate, Marcus drove separately as promised. Samuel and Annie rode in his old Buick, where the dashboard clock was wrong and gospel radio played low. The drive to Decatur took them past oak-lined streets, small brick homes, and yards with plastic flamingos fading in the sun. Helen Carter's house was pale yellow with white shutters and a porch full of potted plants. A wind chime moved gently, though there was almost no breeze. Samuel parked at the curb. Marcus's sedan stopped half a block behind them. Annie looked at the house, then touched the notebook in her lap. Samuel turned off the engine. "Remember, we are not here to scare an old woman. What if she lies? Then listen for what the lie is protecting." Annie nodded, stepped out, and walked with him up the short path. Before they reached the porch, the front curtain shifted. Someone inside had been watching. Samuel knocked first, gently, the way older people knocked when they wanted the person inside to know they had been raised right. No one answered. He waited, then knocked again. "Mrs. Carter?" "It's Samuel Reed. I used to work security at Whitmore Foundation. I'm here with Clara Brooks's daughter." The curtain moved again. Annie stood beside him with the notebook held against her ribs. The porch boards were clean, swept recently. A small ceramic angel sat near the door, its wings chipped at the edges. On the rocking chair was a folded quilt, faded blue and white, the kind someone used every morning and brought inside before rain. A woman's voice came through the door. "I don't know anybody by that name." Samuel did not argue. "Yes, Mum." Annie looked at him, surprised. He added, "But I think you remember the Phoenix." The house went quiet. A deadbolt turned. Then another. The door opened only as far as the chain allowed. An elderly white woman looked out through the gap. Her hair was thin and pinned back. Her glasses hung from a cord around her neck. She looked past Samuel first, then at Annie, and whatever she saw there made her hand tighten on the door. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. Annie answered before Samuel could. "I didn't want to." Mrs. Carter's eyes flicked to the notebook. "Is that hers?" "Yes, ma'am," Annie said. "My mother's." The old woman closed her eyes for a second. "Lord have mercy." From inside, a younger woman called, "Mama, everything all right?" Mrs. Carter opened the door wider but kept the chain on. "Go finish your call, Denise." "I'm fine." Annie almost turned at the name, but the woman inside did not appear. Footsteps moved away. Mrs. Carter looked back at Samuel. "If Richard Caldwell sent you, you can tell him I'm too old to be useful and too close to Jesus to be threatened." Samuel's mouth tightened. "Richard didn't send us." "Then he'll know soon enough." "Maybe," Samuel said. "But Miss Annie deserves to know what happened to her mother." Mrs. Carter stared at Annie for a long moment. "You have Clara's eyes. My grandmother says I have her temper. She had reason for it." The chain slid free. Mrs. Carter stepped back and let them in. The house smelled of lemon cleaner, old paper, and something baking. The living room was small but orderly, with family photographs on every shelf. Children in graduation gowns. A man in uniform. A younger Mrs. Carter standing beside a church choir. Annie noticed how a life could be displayed so plainly when no one had tried to erase it. Mrs. Carter led them to the kitchen. "Sit down. I don't talk about the dead standing up." Annie and Samuel sat at the table. Mrs. Carter filled a kettle, though her hands shook enough that water splashed onto the counter. "You don't have to make tea," Annie said. "Yes, I do. My nerves need something to do." Samuel waited until she sat across from them before speaking. "Mrs. Carter, we need to ask about correspondence routed through the fellowship office in 1999 and 2000. The old woman's face closed. "That was a long time ago." "Not long enough," Annie said. Mrs. Carter looked at her, and some of the defensiveness left her. "No, I suppose not." Annie opened the notebook to the first Phoenix drawing and turned it toward her. Mrs. Carter's hand went to her mouth. She touched the edge of the page but not the drawing itself, as if the ink still belonged to someone who might object. "She drew that on envelopes," Mrs. Carter whispered. "Every one she sent him. Sometimes small in the corner, sometimes across the back flap. I told her once it would make the mail easy to recognize. She said that was the point." "To Marcus?" Annie asked. Mrs. Carter nodded. "Mr. Marcus, yes. Back then he wasn't like he is now." He laughed more. "Not around his mother, and never around Mr. Caldwell. But with Clara he did." Samuel leaned forward. "The letters didn't arrive." "No," Mrs. Carter said. "They came through the office after the incident. That was Mr. Caldwell's instruction. All communication involving Clara Brooks was to be reviewed by legal counsel before delivery." "Why would Clara agree to that?" Annie asked. "She didn't. At least, I never saw proof she did. We were told it was because of the investigation. Proprietary material, intellectual property, liability. Those words were thrown around until everyone stopped asking plain questions. Annie heard Miss Pritchard in HR saying perception and procedural exposure. Different room, same trick. "How many letters?" Samuel asked. Mrs. Carter's eyes moved toward the hallway. Samuel noticed. "You kept something." "I kept what I could live with," she said. She rose slowly and left the kitchen. Annie heard a drawer open, then the soft scrape of something being moved. When Mrs. Carter returned, she carried a manila envelope with a rubber band around it. The envelope looked older than Annie. Mrs. Carter placed it on the table but did not release it right away. "I was a secretary, not a lawyer. Not important. That's what I told myself. I had 2 children, a sick husband, and a paycheck that cleared every Friday. When powerful men put papers in front of people like me, they count on us needing groceries more than we need peace." Annie did not soften her voice. "My mother needed groceries too." Mrs. Carter flinched. "Yes, she did." She slid the envelope toward Annie. Inside were photocopied pages from a mail ledger. Dates, initials, sender, recipient, routing notes. Annie saw her mother's name again and again. Clara Brooks to Marcus Whitmore. Marcus Whitmore to Clara Brooks. Some entries had a small mark in the margin, like a stamped code. "What does RC review mean?" Annie asked. "Richard Caldwell," Samuel said. Mrs. Carter nodded. "Those were held for legal review." That was what the ledger said. But held did not mean reviewed. Held meant they went into a locked cabinet in Mr. Caldwell's office. Later, some were transferred to archive boxes. Annie's throat tightened. "How many?" Mrs. Carter looked at her hands. 31 from Clara to Marcus that I personally logged. 26 from Marcus to Clara. There may have been more after I was transferred. The numbers entered Annie like a physical weight. 31 times her mother had written. 26 times Marcus had answered. 57 chances stolen by a locked cabinet. And a man with clean hands. "Did either of them know?" Annie asked. Mrs. Carter shook her head. "No. They were each sent one final letter." Samuel's expression hardened. "Forged? I don't know who typed them. I only know I saw them before they went out, and the language was wrong." Clara's letter to Marcus said she regretted an inappropriate attachment and wished to sever all future communication. Marcus's letter to Clara said he accepted the Foundation's findings and wanted no further contact. Annie's fingers pressed into the table. "He didn't write that." "No. My mother didn't either." "No." The kettle began to whistle. Mrs. Carter stood too quickly, and Samuel rose to help, but she waved him off. The sound filled the kitchen until she removed the kettle from the heat. Annie stared at the ledger pages. Suddenly, her mother's silence made a different kind of sense. Clara had not simply been abandoned. She had been answered with cruelty, wearing the mask of Marcus's voice. "Why didn't you come forward?" Annie asked. Mrs. Carter's shoulders sank. "I told myself it was not my place. Then my husband's cancer came back, and Mr. Caldwell approved extended benefits through the Foundation. After that, it became harder to pretend I was simply afraid. I was bought, Miss Brooks, not with a bag of cash, with medical coverage. That is how decent people are made useful to indecent men." The words landed too close to Annie's own fear. Street Catherine, Marcus's help, Evelyn's medicine. She understood, and hated that she understood. Samuel said, "Do the original letters still exist?" "I don't know, but they were not destroyed then." Mr. Caldwell liked records. He believed paper was power. "Where would they be?" "Off-site archive first. Then I heard some legal boxes were moved after the Foundation reorganized. There was a storage facility in Marietta. Then later a private records contractor. I wrote down what I could." Mrs. Carter pulled another sheet from the envelope. "Box numbers. Not complete, but enough to start." Annie took the page with careful hands. "Why keep this?" Mrs. Carter looked at her. "Because your mother came to my desk the day she was escorted out." She was pale, but she stood straight. "She asked me if any of her letters had gone through. I lied. I said I didn't know." She looked at me for a long time and said, "Mrs. Carter, I hope one day you get tired of being careful." The old woman's eyes filled. "I did. It only took me too long." Before Annie could answer, Mrs. Carter's phone rang from the counter. She glanced at the screen and went still. Samuel saw her face. "Who is it?" She turned the phone so they could see. Unknown caller. It rang 3 times, then stopped. A text appeared. "Do not open old boxes. Mrs. Carter gripped the counter. Annie stood. He knows we're here. Samuel moved to the front window and looked out through the curtain. Marcus's sedan was still half a block down. Across the street, a gray pickup sat by the curb with a man behind the wheel. Mrs. Carter whispered, "I told you. He always knows." Annie folded the ledger pages and put them back in the envelope, then held the notebook against them both. Fear came, but it did not come alone. Under it was anger, and under that something steadier. "My mother wrote 31 letters," Annie said. "You kept the proof. That means he doesn't know everything." Mrs. Carter looked at her. "You sound like Clara." "Good." Samuel returned from the window. "We leave now." "Mrs. Carter, call your daughter into the room and don't answer unknown numbers. I'll have someone from church check on you." Annie headed for the door, but Mrs. Carter caught her wrist lightly. Not like Carl. Not to stop her. To ask. "Miss Brooks," she said, "when you see Mr. Whitmore, tell him I'm sorry." Annie looked down at the old woman's hand. "No," she said. "You tell him yourself when it matters." Outside, the gray pickup started as soon as Annie and Samuel stepped off the porch. Marcus was already out of his sedan, watching it pull away. He crossed the street toward them. "Did she talk?" Annie held up the envelope. "She kept proof," she said. Marcus's face changed when he saw the ledger pages through the open flap. Not relief. Not yet. Something more painful. "How many?" he asked. Annie looked him in the eye. 31 from her, 26 from you." For a moment, Marcus Whitmore did not look like a billionaire. He looked like a man counting every year of his life that had been built around a lie. Then Annie handed him nothing. She put the envelope into her tote beside the notebook. "These stay with me," she said. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, they do." Behind them, Mrs. Carter's wind chime moved though the air was still. The sound was thin, almost fragile, but it carried down the porch steps and into the street. Annie heard it and thought of her mother's letters, trapped for decades in boxes and ledgers and other people's cowardice. Not destroyed, just waiting. Marcus did not reach for the envelope again. That mattered to Annie more than she wanted to admit. They stood on the curb outside Helen Carter's yellow house, while the gray pickup disappeared around the corner. Samuel wrote down the plate from memory on the back of an old church bulletin, his hand steady, his jaw set. Marcus made one phone call to Lydia Grant and said only, "Find out who owns a gray Ford pickup. Georgia plates. Partial K74, quietly." Then he ended the call before Lydia could ask questions. Annie watched him put the phone away. "Do you always talk like people are waiting for orders?" "I'm trying to learn when not to." "Start now." Marcus looked at her, then nodded. "What do you want to do with the ledger?" "Make copies." "Good. Not at your office." "I didn't suggest my office." "You were about to." Samuel slipped the paper into his coat pocket. "We use the copy shop near New Hope. Old machine, bad lighting. Owner minds his business." Marcus glanced at him. "That sounds secure." "It sounds ordinary," Samuel said. "Sometimes ordinary is safer." They drove back toward Atlanta in separate cars. Annie sat in Samuel's Buick with the envelope on her lap, both hands resting on it. 31 letters from Clara, 26 from Marcus, 57 doors closed by someone else. She kept repeating the numbers in her head until they stopped being numbers and became days, mornings, envelopes, stamps, her mother's hands pressing paper flat on a table somewhere, hoping love could cross a city that had already chosen sides. At the copy shop, Samuel stood by the door while Annie fed the pages through the machine herself. The glass plate had a scratch across one corner. The copies came out too dark, so she adjusted the setting and did them again. Marcus waited outside by the window, visible but not hovering. Every few minutes he looked up and down the street. The shop owner, a heavy-set man with reading glasses low on his nose, glanced once at the ledger pages and then looked away like a man who had survived by not becoming curious about other people's trouble. Annie made 3 sets. One for her, one for Samuel, one for Marcus, though she hesitated before handing it to him. "These are copies," she said when they stepped outside. "Not permission." "I understand." "No, you don't. The originals stay with me. If something happens to them, if something happens to my grandmother, if someone from your company decides to clean up another mess, I go to every news station in Atlanta. Marcus took the copies. If something happens to you or Miss Evelyn, I'll go with you. Annie hated that the answer sounded right. Her phone buzzed before she could respond. A local news alert flashed across the screen from a site she had never followed. The headline made her stomach drop. Hotel worker claims billionaire's tattoo is secret link to dead mother. Below it was a blurred photo of Annie in the Whitmore Grand Corridor, holding the lighter. Her hotel uniform was clear enough. Marcus stood partly visible in the frame. Carl's hand was near her wrist, but the angle made it look like she was being stopped while trying to leave with something. Samuel read over her shoulder and swore under his breath. Marcus's phone rang almost immediately. He looked at the screen. "Richard, put it on speaker," Annie said. Marcus hesitated. I said, "Put it on speaker." He answered and did as she asked. Richard Caldwell's voice entered the sidewalk smooth as polished wood. "Marcus, I assume you've seen the unfortunate article." "I have. We need to contain this before it becomes a governance issue. A young hotel employee making emotional claims about your personal tattoo is one thing. The implication that she has access to you after a suspected property incident is another." Annie felt Samuel shift beside her. Marcus's voice stayed flat. She returned my lighter. "Yes, that is your position. But perception matters. I recommend issuing a short statement that you have no personal relationship with the employee, and that any claims regarding her deceased mother are the result of a misunderstanding." Annie stared at Marcus. He looked at her while he answered. "No." There was a pause. Richard's voice cooled. "I will not call Clara Brooks a misunderstanding." Another pause, shorter this time. "You should be careful saying that name in connection with current company matters." "Why?" "Because old accusations, once reopened, rarely serve anyone." Samuel's eyes hardened. Marcus said, "Who sent the photo?" "I have no idea. You knew about the article before I did. I monitor reputational risk. That is my job." "No," Marcus said. "Your job is counsel, not control." Richard gave a small laugh without warmth. "Marcus, you are upset. That is understandable. A young woman has approached you with a sentimental object and a story. I am advising caution." Annie stepped closer to the phone. "My mother was not a story." Silence. Then Richard said, "Who is this?" "Annie Brooks." "I see." His tone changed, not enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for Annie to hear the insult beneath the manners. "Miss Brooks, I advise you to retain counsel before making further claims involving Whitmore Industries. I advise you to stop threatening old women and girls who ask questions." Samuel's mouth twitched. Richard did not answer at once. "Marcus, this is exactly the kind of exposure I mean." Marcus ended the call. Annie looked at him. "He's scared." "Yes," Marcus said. "Good." But good did not last long. By late afternoon, the article had spread. A larger Atlanta business blog picked it up with a worse headline. "Former VIP lounge worker linked to strange claim about billionaire's past." Then came the comments. Annie read 3 before Samuel told her to stop. "Gold digger. Scam. Always looking for a payout. Bet she stole the lighter and made up a story when caught." One comment used her mother's name. "Clara Brooks? Wasn't she the scholarship girl accused of stealing research years ago?" Annie stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Marcus saw her face. "Don't read them. My mother has been dead 3 years," she said. "They still know how to drag her out when it helps them." He had no comfort ready, which was better than a cheap one. When Annie got home, a notice from the hotel was waiting in her email. Her suspension had become termination. The reason was violation of guest property handling policy and conduct inconsistent with brand standards. Brand standards. Annie read the phrase twice and almost laughed. Evelyn was awake in the recliner. A paper pharmacy bag sat unopened on the side table. Annie had forgotten to ask Marcus's people about the medical fund. The day had become too large. "You got fired," Evelyn said. Annie looked up. "How did you know?" "Because you walked in like somebody cut your paycheck and expected you to apologize for bleeding." Annie handed her the phone. Evelyn read the email slowly. Her mouth tightened, but she did not curse. That worried Annie more than if she had. "They dressed it nice," Evelyn said. "Still smells." Annie sat on the couch. "They put Mama's name online." Evelyn closed her eyes. "People are saying she stole research. They don't even know her. They never needed to know us to judge us." Annie's phone buzzed again. Lydia Grant. Annie almost ignored it, then answered. "Miss Brooks," Lydia said, careful but urgent. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to confirm Street Catherine can receive your grandmother tonight for evaluation. No payment requested from you. Documentation will be sent to your email before admission. You can decline." Annie looked at Evelyn, whose breathing sounded shallow even when she tried to hide it. "I need to see the paperwork first," Annie said. "It's already sent." Annie checked. The email was there. Patient Assistance Fund. No personal debt assigned. No non-disclosure language. No release of claims. Samuel must have told them what to avoid. Evelyn watched her. "What is it?" "Hospital, Street Catherine. They can take you tonight." "No." "Grandma." I said no. "You've been short of breath for 2 days. And I've been black in America for 71 years. I know when help comes with a hook." Annie knelt beside her chair. "I read the paperwork. No hook. Samuel will read it too." Evelyn's eyes softened at Samuel's name, then hardened again. "And Marcus? He arranged it." "No." Annie took her hand. "You told me not to go alone. I'm telling you not to die proud in that chair because you're afraid of owing a man who already owes us." Evelyn looked away. Annie's voice broke despite her effort to hold it steady. "Please. I can fight them about Mama. I can fight them about the job. I can fight everybody if I have to. But I can't fight your heart from this living room." For a long moment, the only sound was the television murmuring to no one. Then Evelyn squeezed Annie's hand. "You call Samuel. He reads every page before I get in any car." "I will, and if Marcus Whitmore shows up acting like he bought himself forgiveness, I will get out of that hospital bed and embarrass him in front of every nurse on the floor." Annie let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Yes, ma'am." An hour later, an ambulance pulled up without sirens. Samuel arrived behind it in his Buick, glasses low on his nose, paperwork in hand. Marcus did not come. Only Lydia stood near the curb, giving instructions quietly and stepping back whenever Annie looked overwhelmed. As the paramedics helped Evelyn onto the stretcher, Evelyn caught Annie's wrist. "Don't leave that notebook in this house tonight." "I won't. And don't let them make you ashamed." Annie leaned close. "Of what?" "Of needing help. Shame belongs to the people who made help dangerous." At Street Catherine Medical Center, the lobby was bright, clean, and too quiet. A nurse called Evelyn Miss Brooks with real respect, and Annie nearly cried from that alone. Samuel stayed with Annie through intake. Lydia sat across the room, making calls in a low voice. Near midnight, Marcus arrived. Annie saw him before he saw her. He stood near the elevator, tie loosened, face drawn, copies of the ledger under one arm. He did not approach until she looked at him. "How is she?" he asked. "Stable for now. They're running tests." "Good. You didn't come to the house. You said every time my world touches yours, you lose something. I thought I should wait until invited." Annie leaned back against the wall, too tired to fight the small mercy of that. "I'm not inviting you." "I know." He looked toward the hallway where Evelyn had been taken. "I saw the articles," he said. "Everybody did. I'm issuing a statement tomorrow." "No." Marcus looked at her. "You issue a statement," Richard answers with 10 more lies. "We need proof first. We have the ledger. We have copies of a ledger and an old woman who's scared. That's not enough to clear my mother." Samuel approached from the nurse's station. "She's right." Marcus looked between them. "Then what is enough?" Annie opened her tote and touched the notebook. She thought of the phoenix, the repeated lines, the drawings that were not just drawings. "My mother hid things in here. I know she did. I just don't know how to read them yet," Samuel said. "Then we find someone who can." Marcus's eyes changed. "Dr. Eleanor Marsh." "Who is that?" Annie asked. "Chief engineer at Whitmore Industries. If Clara's work survived inside Phoenix 1, Eleanor will recognize the bones." Annie looked down the hospital corridor, where her grandmother was being kept alive by machines they could never have afforded alone. Then she looked at Marcus, the man whose name had harmed them and might still help them. "No tower," she said. Marcus understood. "Neutral location. And she comes to us. I'll ask." "No," Annie said. "You'll tell her Clara Brooks's daughter has the notebook." Marcus held her gaze. Then he nodded. Yes, I will. Annie sat down, suddenly exhausted. Her job was gone. Her mother's name was being mocked online. Her grandmother was in a hospital bed paid for by the man who might be her father, though nobody had yet dared say it in full. But the ledger was copied. Helen had spoken. Samuel was beside her. Marcus was no longer walking away. And somewhere in Clara's worn notebook, Annie believed, her mother had left more than grief. She had left instructions. Marcus called Dr. Eleanor Marsh from the hospital corridor at 1:17 inches the morning. Annie could not hear the whole conversation, only his side of it, low and controlled near the vending machines where a bag of pretzels cost more than a bus fare. I wouldn't call at this hour if it weren't necessary, he said. No, not a press issue. Clara Brooks. A pause. Yes, that Clara Brooks. Her daughter has a notebook. I need you to look at it somewhere off-site. Another pause, longer this time, because I no longer know who inside the building is clean. Annie sat with Samuel in the waiting area, her shoes planted on the tile, her tote in her lap. Street Catherine smelled like sanitizer, burnt coffee, and fear trying to behave. Nurses moved with quiet speed. A man slept with his head against a wall, still wearing a construction vest. An older couple held hands without speaking, the woman's thumb moving slowly over the man's knuckles like a prayer she had said too many times to need words. Samuel handed Annie a paper cup of water. Drink. I'm not thirsty. Drink anyway. People make bad decisions dehydrated. Annie took it because arguing with him felt like arguing with a church usher and a grandfather at the same time. The water tasted like paper. Down the hall, Marcus ended the call and walked back. Dr. Marsh will meet us at a public library conference room at 9. A library? Annie asked. She suggested it. Samuel nodded. I like her already. She also said if this is a game, she'll walk out in 3 minutes. It's not a game, Annie said. No, Marcus replied. It isn't. A nurse came out before Annie could answer. Family for Evelyn Brooks? Annie stood so fast the tote nearly slipped from her lap. I'm her granddaughter. She's stable. We're keeping her overnight. The doctor wants to run cardiac enzymes again in the morning and do an echocardiogram. She's asking for you. Annie followed the nurse through a set of double doors. Marcus stayed back without being told. Samuel came as far as the nurse's station, then sat down with the paperwork like a man guarding a gate. Evelyn lay propped up in bed, a hospital blanket pulled to her waist, wires attached to her chest, oxygen tubing under her nose. She looked smaller than she had in the recliner. That frightened Annie more than the machines. You look mad, Evelyn said. You scared me. Then we're even. You've been scaring me since you learned to climb out of your crib. Annie sat beside her and took her hand. They're keeping you overnight. I heard. Don't argue. I wasn't going to. Nurses here don't play. Evelyn glanced at the door. He out there? Marcus? Don't act like there are 20 billionaires in the hallway. Annie almost smiled. Yes, he waited. Good. Waiting is good for men who are used to arriving. Annie looked down at their joined hands. Evelyn's skin felt dry and warm. We found Helen Carter. Evelyn closed her eyes. Lord, she kept copies of mail logs. 31 letters from Mama to Marcus. 26 from Marcus to Mama. For a long moment, Evelyn did not speak. When she opened her eyes, they were wet. Clara kept writing, Annie said. I know. Annie's hand went still. You know? I knew she wrote. I didn't know how many. She'd sit at the kitchen table after you were born. When you were sleeping. Writing letters she said she might never send. Sometimes she mailed them. Sometimes she burned them in the sink. Why didn't you tell me? Because what was I supposed to say to a child? Your mother loved a man she believed had abandoned her? Your life began in a room full of lies? I told myself I was letting you grow up without that weight. You let me grow up with questions instead. Evelyn turned her face toward the window. Outside, Atlanta's hospital district glowed against the night. Questions felt lighter at the time. They weren't. I know that now. Annie wanted to be angry, but the sight of Evelyn in that bed made anger complicated. Did Mama know Marcus wrote back? No. Evelyn's voice thinned. Not until maybe near the end. She wondered. Some days she swore he had forgotten her. Some days she said the silence didn't sound like him, but pain will make you doubt your own memory if it lasts long enough. Annie swallowed hard. Marcus thinks I might be his. Evelyn's fingers tightened around hers. He hasn't said it like that, Annie continued, but he knows. Evelyn turned back slowly. And what do you think? I don't know what to think. That may be the first honest thing anybody's said in this whole mess. Is he? Evelyn closed her eyes again, and this time the silence did not feel like protection. It felt like surrender taking its time. Yes, she whispered. The word did not explode. It landed quietly, and somehow that made it worse. Annie felt the room tilt. She heard a monitor beep, heard a cart roll past the door, heard someone laugh softly down the hall, and none of it belonged to her anymore. Yes, Annie repeated. Evelyn nodded once. Tears slipped into the lines at the corners of her eyes. Clara knew. I knew. Marcus did not. Annie pulled her hand away and stood. Babu, no. Annie stepped back, not far, but enough to breathe. You told him there was no child. Evelyn's face broke. I did. Why? Because I had watched that family take your mother's name. I wasn't going to let them take her baby too. You keep saying that like it makes it simple. It was never simple. It was my life. Evelyn flinched as if Annie had raised a hand. That hurt Annie too, but not enough to stop. He was my father, Annie said, the words strange and bitter in her mouth. I had one, and you let me think I didn't. I let you stay with the people who loved you. He might have loved me. He might have. Evelyn's voice shook. And his mother might have called a lawyer before he got the chance. Richard Caldwell might have found a way to make Clara look unstable. A judge might have looked at his money and your mother's ruined name and decided where you belonged. Don't ask me to pretend fear came from nowhere. Annie had no answer for that, and she hated that too. Evelyn reached for her, then let her hand fall. I made a choice. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe I stole something from you, but I was holding a newborn baby and a daughter who could barely stand. And every door with the Whitmore name on it looked like a mouth. Annie turned away, wiping her face before the tears could fully form. I don't know how to forgive that. I didn't ask you to do it tonight. The door opened softly. Samuel stood there, hat in hand. He looked from Evelyn to Annie, and understood enough not to ask. Doctor says visiting hours are bending, not breaking. We got a few more minutes. Evelyn looked at him. Samuel Reed, you still carry bad news like a folded flag. Yes, ma'am. And you still scare doctors, I see. I scare fools. Doctors just happen to get in the way. Annie almost laughed despite herself. Samuel's presence steadied the room. He looked at Annie. Marcus is in the chapel. Figured you might need space. Of course he was, Annie thought. The man kept doing the decent thing just late enough to make her furious. Evelyn heard the name and closed her eyes. I need to speak to him. Annie stared at her. Now? Before I lose courage or breath, whichever goes first. Samuel looked to Annie, not Evelyn. Your call. That mattered. Everyone kept trying to make decisions around her. Samuel handed this one back. Annie stood still for a moment, then nodded. 5 minutes. Samuel left and returned with Marcus. Marcus entered the room as if crossing a church aisle. He stopped at the foot of Evelyn's bed. For a long moment, neither spoke. These were not strangers. Annie saw that now. They had stood in some version of this silence before. Years ago, when everyone was younger and Clara was still alive. Miss Evelyn, Marcus said. Don't soften me with manners, Evelyn replied. I'm too tired to swat them away. Marcus accepted that. All right. Evelyn looked at him, really looked. She's yours. Annie's chest tightened, though the word had already been spoken. Marcus's face changed, not with surprise, but with the pain of hearing aloud what his body had already understood. I know, he said quietly. No, Evelyn said. You suspect. I am telling you. Annie is your daughter. Marcus gripped the metal footrail of the bed. His knuckles whitened. Evelyn's voice shook. But she did not look away. I lied to you. When you came looking, I told you Clara had no child. I told myself I was protecting Annie. Maybe I was. Maybe I was punishing you. Maybe fear and anger wore the same dress by then. Marcus took a breath that sounded unsteady. Did Clara ask you to lie? Evelyn closed her eyes. Not like that. She said, don't let them take my baby. I decided what that meant. Annie looked at Marcus, waiting for rage. It would have been easier if he raged. He did not. He lowered his head for a moment, then said, "You protected her the only way you knew how." Evelyn opened her eyes, startled. "But I should have built a world," he continued, voice rough now, "where Clara didn't need protection from my name." The room went silent. Annie sat down because her legs had begun to shake. Evelyn turned her face away, but not before Annie saw the tears. Marcus looked at Annie. He did not step closer. "I will not ask you to call me anything. I will not ask you to accept anything tonight. I don't have the right." "You don't," Annie said. "I know, but you are going to help clear my mother's name." "Yes, not because I'm your daughter." His jaw tightened. "Because Clara deserved it before I knew you existed." Annie held his gaze, searching for the lie. She did not find it. That did not mean trust. It only meant the truth had one less place to hide. The next morning, after 2 hours of restless sleep in a vinyl chair, Annie met Marcus and Samuel in the hospital lobby. Evelyn was stable, irritated, and ordering nurses to stop fussing, which everyone agreed was a good sign. Dr. Eleanor Marsh arrived at the public library at 9:04 wearing a gray blazer, no makeup, and the expression of a woman who had already decided she did not have time for nonsense. She was in her late 50s, black, with close-cropped silver hair and a leather satchel heavy enough to contain either engineering files or bricks. She shook Samuel's hand first, then Annie's, then Marcus's. "I have 40 minutes, she said. "If this is about public relations, I'm leaving in 3. Annie placed the notebook on the conference table. "It's about my mother," she said. Dr. Marsh looked at the cover, then opened it carefully. Her expression remained skeptical for the first page, focused on the second, and completely still by the fourth. She turned another page, then another. Marcus did not speak. Samuel did not move. Annie watched Dr. Marsh's finger trace a series of lines around the broken phoenix wing, then stop at a cluster of numbers Annie had never understood. Dr. Marsh looked up slowly. "Where did your mother study after Whitmore?" she asked. "She didn't," Annie said. "They ruined her before she could." Dr. Marsh looked back at the notebook. "Then someone at Whitmore has been lying for a very long time," she said. Annie leaned forward. "About what?" Dr. Marsh tapped the page. "This isn't just a drawing," she said. "This is the skeleton of Phoenix 1. Dr. Eleanor Marsh did not raise her voice when she said it, but the sentence struck the room harder than shouting would have. Annie looked down at the page. The broken phoenix was there, one wing bent, tail feathers cut into sharp little angles, curves and numbers hidden in the pattern like Clara had drawn grief and engineering in the same breath. "The skeleton," Annie repeated. Dr. Marsh pulled a pair of reading glasses from her blazer pocket and put them on. "Not the finished system, not the software layer we use now, but the core architecture, yes. Load recovery through staged rerouting, heat compensation through pattern dissipation, fault tolerance without full shutdown. Whoever designed this understood failure not as an end state, but as a condition to move through." Samuel sat back, his mouth set. "That sounds like Clara." Marcus stood by the window with one hand on the chair back. He had not touched the notebook once. "How close is it to Phoenix 1? Dr. Marsh turned another page, then another. "Close enough that if this predates our archive development files, Whitmore Industries has a problem." Annie's throat tightened. "A legal problem? A moral one first," Dr. Marsh said. "Then legal. Companies prefer the reverse order, because it gives them more time to draft statements." Samuel gave a quiet grunt of approval. Marcus came back to the table. "Can you verify dates? Not from the notebook alone. We need ink dating, paper analysis, chain of custody, comparison against early internal files. But I can tell you something right now. Doctor," Marsh pointed to a section near the lower wing. "This notation here. We still use a refined version of this control pathway. It is not publicly known. It is not in marketing materials. It should not be in an old student notebook unless the student created it or had access to the person who did." "My mother created it," Annie said. Dr. Marsh looked at her over the glasses. "Then we prove that." For the first time since the lighter hit her palm, Annie felt something other than fear pushing up through her ribs. Not relief. Not even hope. Something more stubborn. "What do you need?" she asked. Dr. Marsh closed the notebook carefully. "Access to the earliest Phoenix 1 technical archive," Marcus said. "Richard controls legal archive access. I don't need legal. I need engineering revision history." Some of that sits on our internal server, but the oldest scanned material came from foundation boxes. Richard may not know engineers are sentimental hoarders. Samuel leaned forward. Meaning? Meaning technical people keep drafts that lawyers forget exist. Old drives, lab notebooks, scan batches, email attachments with bad file names. If Clara's work entered Whitmore through the fellowship, it likely left fingerprints before someone cleaned the official record. Annie thought of Clara at a lab table, writing numbers into the shape of wings. Can you get them? Dr. Marsh looked at Marcus. Not if Mr. Whitmore orders me to. That makes it a governance issue and alerts half the building. But I can request a technical audit of Phoenix 1 due to the recent instability in the prototype. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Instability? Dr. Marsh removed her glasses. There have been test anomalies for 6 weeks. You did not bring this to me. I brought it to the program office. Twice. Richard advised that until the investor demonstration, reports be consolidated to avoid creating unnecessary concern. Marcus's face went still in a way Annie was beginning to recognize. It was not calm. It was controlled anger. What kind of anomalies? Samuel asked. Not catastrophic. Small load irregularities under stress simulations. Recovery lag in the tertiary routing loop. The kind of issue that could be dismissed as calibration until it fails in front of the right people. Annie remembered a note in the notebook. One she had seen many times without understanding it. Wait. She opened the notebook again, flipped past the Phoenix drawings, past loose equations, past a page where Clara had written a grocery list beside a power curve. Near the back was a sketch of a circle broken into 3 segments. Under it, in her mother's hand, if they bend the third path, it will stand until everyone is watching. Annie turned the page toward Dr. Marsh. Is this anything? Dr. Marsh read it once and went silent. Marcus leaned closer but did not touch. Eleanor? She tapped the line. Tertiary path. Third path. Recovery lag in the tertiary routing loop. Samuel's face hardened. So somebody is making Phoenix 1 fail the way Clara warned it could fail. Possibly, Dr. Marsh said. Or Clara understood the weakness before anyone else. And that weakness was never properly corrected, Marcus said. Which is worse? If it's negligence, bad. If it's intentional, criminal. Annie looked from one face to another. Richard wants it to fail? Marcus did not answer quickly. Dr. Marsh did. Phoenix 1 is scheduled for a major demonstration in 9 days. State officials, investors, federal energy observers, press. If it fails publicly, valuation drops, leadership gets blamed, and someone can argue for outside acquisition or restructuring. Samuel looked at Marcus. Anybody been arguing for that? Marcus's jaw tightened. Richard has been pushing a contingency partnership with Meridian Capital. Dr. Marsh gave a short, humorless laugh. Meridian? They've been circling energy assets for 2 years. Annie felt the shape of it. Past and present folding together. Clara's work stolen once. Now set up to be stolen again. This time dressed in investor language and emergency planning. My mother wrote Richard took the wings, Annie said. Maybe he never stopped. Dr. Marsh looked at her with new attention. Miss Brooks, may I photograph selected pages? No. Marcus looked down. Annie added, not with a company phone. Not with anything connected to Whitmore. Dr. Marsh nodded at once. Fair? Samuel? Samuel took out an old digital camera from his bag, the kind people used before phones took over everything. Annie stared at him. You just carry that. I told you, Samuel said. I don't improvise where lawyers are concerned. For the next half hour, Annie turned pages while Samuel photographed them on the conference table. Dr. Marsh wrote notes by hand on a yellow legal pad. Marcus stood near the door and watched the hallway as if expecting Richard Caldwell to materialize between the mystery shelves and the children's reading posters. When they finished, Dr. Marsh tore off the top sheet of her notes and handed it to Annie. This is a plain language summary of what I observed today. Not a formal report. Not yet. Keep it with your copies. Annie read the first line. Clara Brooks' notebook contains technical concepts materially similar to early Phoenix 1 architecture. Her mother's name and the word technical on the same page felt like a door opening. Dr. Marsh packed her satchel. I'll initiate an internal technical audit this afternoon. Quietly, Marcus said. Eleanor, if Richard blocks you, he will. She stood. Men like Richard don't block doors because they are strong. They block them because they know someone behind them has a key. Samuel smiled faintly. Before leaving, Dr. Marsh looked at Annie. Your mother was not doodling. Annie pressed her lips together. I know. No, Dr. Marsh said, gentler now. I mean, she was not hiding in those pages. She was preserving herself. After Dr. Marsh left through the side entrance, Marcus remained in the conference room with Annie and Samuel. Outside the glass wall, a toddler dragged a picture book across the carpet, while his mother whispered for him to slow down. The normal life of the library continued around them, quiet and stubborn. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at it and did not answer. Richard? Samuel asked. Board secretary, Marcus said. Emergency governance call at 4. Annie's eyes lifted. Because of me? Because of the article, the prototype anomalies, and whatever Richard wants to make of both. So yes, Marcus put the phone away. They are going to frame this as instability. Mine, yours, the company's. Richard will make himself sound like the only adult in the room. He's good at that, Samuel said. Annie looked at Marcus. What will you say? The truth. Samuel shook his head. Not enough. Marcus looked at him. Samuel folded his hands over his cane. Truth without order. Sounds emotional to people who profit from confusion. You need sequence. Date, document, witness, motive. Annie nodded slowly. That's how he beat my mother. He made a story people could file. Marcus studied her. Then we make one they can't ignore. Annie checked her phone. A message from Street Catherine said Evelyn was asking for her and refusing hospital eggs. For a second, Annie smiled despite everything. I need to get back to my grandmother. I'll drive you, Marcus said. No, Samuel will. Marcus did not argue. All right. That was another small thing. He was learning the difference between offering and taking over. In Samuel's Buick, Annie held the notebook in her lap. They drove past elementary schools, gas stations, a florist, a payday loan place, and a new apartment building named after a grove of trees that had probably been cut down to build it. Atlanta moved past them in pieces. Old brick, new glass, church signs, traffic cones, cranes. Samuel kept the radio low. After a few minutes he said, You did well in there. I didn't do much. You said no when people expected yes. That is doing plenty. Annie looked out the window. Dr. Marsh thinks Mama hid instructions in the drawings. Your mother knew paper could outlive fear. She also knew nobody believed her while she was alive. Samuel was quiet for a block. That is why we must be careful with her now. Clearing a name is not dragging a dead woman into the light for spectacle. It is bringing her home with dignity. At Street Catherine, Evelyn was awake and irritated, which made the nurse smile when she warned Annie that her grandmother had strong opinions about oatmeal. It looked like wallpaper paste, Evelyn said when Annie entered. You're in a cardiac unit, not a diner. I've had better meals at church meetings where the power went out. Annie set the toad on the chair and kissed her forehead. Dr. Marsh looked at the notebook. Evelyn's expression shifted. And? She said Mama's drawings are part of Phoenix 1. Evelyn turned her face toward the window. Her eyes filled but did not spill. Clara said they would dress her work up one day and pretend it came from a boardroom. She knew? She knew enough. Annie sat beside her. Why didn't she fight? Evelyn looked back at her, tired and sharp at once. She did. You just grew up seeing the part after the fight, took everything from her. That stayed with Annie. Later, while Evelyn slept, Annie opened the notebook again. On a page she had skipped for years because it looked unfinished, she noticed a small sketch of the silver lighter. Beneath it, almost hidden under a trail of numbers, Clara had written, "The flame remembers what they tried to burn." Annie's fingers went cold. She took out her phone and called Samuel. "I found something," she whispered. "What?" "A drawing of the lighter." Samuel's voice changed. "Does Marcus know?" Annie looked toward the hospital corridor where Lydia's card sat in her pocket like a question. "No," she said. "Not yet." Outside Evelyn's room, a man in a dark blazer passed the door too slowly. Annie saw him through the glass reflection before he moved on. She closed the notebook. This time, she understood the warning in her mother's words. The lighter was not just a memory. It was part of the map. Annie did not call Marcus first. That surprised even her. She called Samuel, then waited beside Evelyn's hospital bed with the notebook closed on her lap and her eyes on the glass reflection in the room's door. The man in the dark blazer did not pass again, but his slow walk had left the hallway feeling watched. Evelyn slept with her mouth slightly open, one hand resting outside the blanket, the hospital bracelet loose around her wrist. Annie wanted to wake her and ask about the lighter. She wanted to ask why Clara had drawn it, why she had hidden the note under numbers, why every answer seemed to open a door with another lock behind it. But Evelyn needed sleep more than Annie needed relief. Samuel arrived 20 minutes later with 2 coffees and the face of a man who had already decided the night was not done with him. "Show me," he said. Annie opened the notebook to the page. Samuel did not touch it. He bent over it, reading the line beneath the small sketch of the lighter. "The flame remembers what they tried to burn," he murmured. "You think it means something is inside it? I think your mother did not waste words. It's Marcus's lighter. Was it always?" Annie looked up. "What do you mean?" Samuel pulled the visitor chair closer and sat. "That lighter looked old. Not gift shop old, personal old. Men like Marcus Whitmore don't carry cheap habits for 20 years unless the habit means something." "She gave it to him," Annie said, remembering Marcus's careful way of holding it. "Or he kept it because of her. Then we need to know whether she altered it." Annie glanced at Evelyn. "How do we ask him without handing him the map?" Carefully, Samuel took out his phone. Annie put her hand over it before he could dial. "Wait." He looked at her. "If that lighter has proof inside, and Marcus has carried it all these years, then Richard doesn't know. If Marcus finds out and reacts the wrong way, Richard might know by morning." Samuel held her gaze. "You're learning. I hate that. Most useful lessons arrive ugly." Annie looked back at the notebook. The sketch of the lighter was small, but the bottom edge was drawn with unusual detail. 3 short lines near the base, 1 arrow pointing left, a tiny crescent mark near the hinge. It was not decorative. It was instruction. "We need the lighter," she said. "Yes," without making Marcus feel accused. Samuel leaned back. "Miss Annie, sometimes you can ask a man for the truth and still let him keep his pride. But don't protect his pride at the cost of your mother's proof." Annie sat with that. Marcus was her father. The word still felt foreign and inconvenient, like a coat someone had put around her shoulders in weather she had not prepared for. She did not know what to do with it. She knew what to do with Clara's notebook. Hold it, copy it, read it, protect it. She took out Lydia Grant's card instead of calling Marcus directly. Lydia answered on the second ring. "Miss Brooks? I need to speak with Mr. Whitmore." "Not on speaker. Not around anyone from the company. He's at the tower on a board call." "Then get him out of the room." There was a brief pause. "Is Miss Evelyn all right?" "For now, this is about the lighter." Lydia's voice changed. "I'll call you back in 2 minutes." She called back in 90 seconds. "Mr. Whitmore is on a secure line." Marcus's voice came through a moment later, lower than usual. "Annie, do you have the lighter with you?" "Yes." "Is anyone near you?" "No. I stepped out." "Don't show it to anyone. Don't mention it to Richard. Don't mention it to the board." Silence then. "What did you find?" "My mother drew the lighter in the notebook." Marcus breathed in, once. "Drew it how?" "Like there's something about the base." "Did Clara give it to you?" "Yes." "When?" "The night before everything started falling apart." Annie closed her eyes. Of course, Clara had known. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Marcus continued. "She said it was a foolish gift for a man who didn't smoke. I told her I'd keep it anyway." "Did she ever ask for it back?" "No." "Did you ever open it?" "It opens at the top. It's a lighter." "No," Annie said. "Did you ever open the bottom?" Another silence. This one lasted long enough for Samuel to look at her sharply. Marcus said, "I didn't know the bottom opened." "Come to Street, Catherine. Bring it. No driver, no Carl, no one from legal. I'm leaving now." "Marcus." "Yes?" "If Richard asks where you're going, lie." A tired sound came through the line, almost a laugh, but not quite. "Clara once gave me the same instruction." "Then listen better this time." She hung up before the sentence could become too personal. Samuel nodded. "Good. I just told a billionaire to lie." "You told a man to stop being predictable." Marcus arrived 35 minutes later wearing the same suit, but the tie was gone and the collar was open. He looked like the board call had taken more from him than he meant to show. He stopped at the doorway to Evelyn's room and waited until Annie waved him in. Evelyn opened one eye. "If you wake me for foolishness, I'm charging consultation." Marcus's face softened, just for a second. "Yes, ma'am." Annie held out her hand. The lighter. Marcus took it from his jacket pocket. The silver looked duller under hospital light. He placed it in Annie's palm without argument. That trust unsettled her. She opened the notebook and turned it so he could see the sketch. Marcus leaned closer but kept his hands behind his back. "I never saw this page," he said. "You haven't seen most of it." "I know." Samuel pointed to the 3 short marks Clara had drawn. "Base seam." Marcus frowned. "There's no seam." Annie turned the lighter over. To her eye, the bottom looked smooth. But Clara had drawn the crescent near the hinge. Annie pressed there with her thumbnail. Nothing happened. She tried twisting. Still nothing. Evelyn's voice came from the bed. Clara hated obvious locks. All 3 turned to her. Evelyn's eyes were open now, clearer than they had been in days. When she was little, she used to hide things in plain sight. Said if people expect a lock, don't give them one. Annie moved the lighter closer. "Grandma, did you know about this?" "No, but I knew my daughter." Samuel took a penlight from his pocket and shone it across the base at an angle. A fine line appeared near the bottom, almost invisible, unless the light cut sideways. Marcus whispered, "My God." Annie found the crescent mark and pressed, not hard, but with steady pressure. Then she twisted the base left. A tiny click sounded in the room. Evelyn's monitor kept beeping. Somewhere in the hallway, a cart squeaked. Annie felt none of it. The bottom of the lighter loosened by a fraction. Samuel held out a clean handkerchief. "Over this." Slowly, Annie turned the lighter upside down. A narrow metal capsule slid out, no bigger than a lipstick tube, wrapped in brittle waxed paper. Marcus took one step back as if the object had struck him. Annie looked at him. "You carried this for 23 years. His voice was rough. "I carried what she gave me. I didn't know she gave me her last defense." Samuel unwrapped the capsule carefully. Inside was a thin strip of microfilm and a folded piece of fire-resistant paper, yellowed but intact. The handwriting was Clara's. Annie knew before she read it. Her mother's letters curved forward slightly, as if every word was in a hurry to live. She unfolded the paper. "If they take my name, this will tell the truth." Annie stopped there. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself to keep reading. "Marcus, if this ever reaches you, don't trust the report. Don't trust Richard. The Phoenix framework is mine. And the third path is the key. If they burn the lab, the proof is not in the lab anymore." Below that was a date, Clara's signature, and a sequence of numbers. Dr. Marsh had to see this. Marcus sat down slowly in the chair beside the wall. He covered his mouth with one hand. Annie had seen men fake grief before, especially in church, where some people cried louder when others were watching. This was not that. This was a man realizing that a woman he loved had placed the truth in his pocket, and he had carried it through decades of ignorance. Evelyn looked at him from the bed. "She trusted you with it." Marcus shook his head. "And I failed to understand. You were young. That is not absolution." "No," Evelyn said. "It's context. Don't confuse the two." Annie held the paper with both hands. "What are these numbers?" Samuel took a photograph before anyone moved the note. "Box numbers, maybe. Patent references. Lab storage. Or coordinates inside an archive system." Marcus reached for his phone, then stopped and looked at Annie. "May I call Eleanor Marsh?" Annie nodded. "On speaker," he called. Dr. Marsh answered with no greeting. "Tell me this is worth interrupting." "The worst governance call in company history," Marcus said. We opened the lighter. A pause. Dr. Marsh said, "I'm listening." Annie read the note aloud. When she finished, Dr. Marsh was silent long enough that Annie checked the screen. Then the engineer said, "The third path. That confirms intent." "What intent?" Annie asked. "If the current Phoenix 1 anomaly is in the same pathway Clara identified, then either the company ignored her warning for 23 years, or someone is recreating the vulnerability now." Marcus said, "Richard, we need the earliest patent transfer records and the current component revision logs." Dr. Marsh said. And Marcus, you need to understand something. During the board call, Richard moved for an independent review of your judgment. Marcus's face hardened. On what grounds? Emotional entanglement with Miss Brooks, reputational exposure, and failure to disclose a personal connection to Clara Brooks. Annie almost laughed. He stole my mother's life, and now I'm the conflict of interest? Samuel said. That's how men like him work. They set the fire, then accuse you of carrying smoke. Dr. Marsh continued. There's more. A confidential Phoenix 1 file was accessed this afternoon using temporary credentials assigned to hospital administrative support. Annie went cold. Hospital? Yes. Street Catherine. Marcus stood. Who authorized that? I'm tracing it. But if someone plants a file near Annie, they can claim she accessed company material while benefiting from your medical arrangement for her grandmother. Evelyn cursed under her breath. Annie looked toward the hallway. The man in the dark blazer, passing too slowly. They're setting me up, she said. Samuel was already moving to the door. Nobody touches her bag. Marcus turned to Annie. Where is your tote? She looked to the visitor chair. It was gone. For 1 second, Annie could not move. Then the room sharpened around her. The notebook was on the bed table because she had taken it out. The lighter was on Samuel's handkerchief. The ledger copies were in Samuel's folder. But her tote had held Marcus's statement, Lydia's card, pharmacy receipts, and her hotel badge. Enough to plant, enough to twist, enough to build another clean lie. Samuel opened the door and looked down the hall. Nurse. A nurse turned. Sir? A young woman's bag is missing from this room. Call security. But not hospital security if they report to outside contractors. Call your floor supervisor first. Marcus was already on the phone with Lydia. Lock down elevator footage on the cardiac floor. Now. No, not a request. Annie stood beside Evelyn's bed, the paper from the lighter still in her hand. Her body wanted to shake, but anger held it steady. Her mother had written, if they take my name, this will tell the truth. Now they were trying to take Annie's name too. She folded Clara's note with care and placed it inside the notebook. Let them try, she said. Marcus looked at her. Annie met his eyes. This time, we know where the lie begins. The floor supervisor arrived before hospital security did. She was a compact woman in navy scrubs named Mrs. Alvarez, with reading glasses hanging from a chain and a voice that made people stop explaining themselves before they had facts. Tell me exactly what was in the bag, she said. Annie stood beside Evelyn's bed, forcing herself to speak slowly. Wallet, employee badge from Whitmore Grand, pharmacy receipts, my house keys, a letter from Mr. Whitmore saying I returned his lighter, and a folded church bulletin with a phone number on it. No notebook? Annie shook her head. No, Mom. No medical records? No. Mrs. Alvarez looked at Marcus. She recognized him. Everyone did. But she did not bend her voice around it. You requested footage? My office did. This is my floor, she said. Your office can request through proper channels. I'll preserve the footage. Marcus paused, then nodded. Thank you. Annie almost liked Mrs. Alvarez for that alone. Samuel stood near the door, watching the hall. A man in a dark blazer passed this room twice. Miss Annie saw him through the reflection. Mrs. Alvarez turned to Annie. Can you describe him? White, maybe 40s, dark hair, no tie. He walked like he was trying not to hurry. That describes half the consultants in this hospital. Evelyn muttered from the bed. Mrs. Alvarez glanced at her. Miss Brooks, I need you to rest. I'm resting angry. It's still rest. The nurse did not smile, but her eyes softened for half a second. I'll have the nurses station check visitor logs. Marcus stepped into the hall to call Lydia again. Annie could hear pieces of it. Floor access. Temporary credentials. No police yet. Preserve everything. He sounded controlled, but Annie had begun to notice the difference between calm and restraint. Marcus was restraining himself. 20 minutes later, the bag was found in a staff restroom 2 floors down. A hospital security officer carried it in a clear plastic evidence bag. The tote looked ordinary and ruined at the same time, like something personal had been handled by strangers and made unclean. Mrs. Alvarez did not let anyone touch it. It was found behind the trash bin. Nothing obvious removed. Samuel asked. Who found it? Environmental Services. Name? Mrs. Alvarez looked at him. I'll include it in the report. Annie stared at the tote. Open it. Not here, Samuel said. If they put something in it, I need to know. Private. Private panic. Public paperwork. Samuel's voice was firm. That is how they got your mother. Private panic. Public paperwork. That stopped her. Mrs. Alvarez arranged for the bag to be opened in a small administrative room with 2 nurses. Hospital security. Samuel, Marcus, and Annie present. Evelyn was not allowed to come, which led to a 3-minute argument she lost only because the cardiologist walked in and threatened to order more tests if she did not lie still. Annie stood with her arms folded as each item was removed and photographed. Wallet. Keys. Pharmacy receipt. Badge. Marcus's letter. Church. Bulletin. Lip balm. A granola bar she had forgotten about. Then the security officer reached into the inner pocket and pulled out a slim black flash drive. Annie's stomach dropped. That's not mine. No one spoke for 1 long second. Marcus's face went cold. Do not plug that into anything. Samuel leaned over the table, not touching. Photograph it in place. The security officer looked unsure. Mrs. Alvarez said, Do as he says. Annie stared at the flash drive. Such a small thing. Small enough to ruin a life. Small enough to make a headline. Small enough to turn her into Clara all over again. Marcus stepped back and made another call. Lydia, we have a planted device in Miss Brooks's bag. I want outside digital forensics. Not Whitmore. Not hospital IT. Independent. And find Dr. Marsh. Annie looked up. They're going to say I stole files. Samuel said, Yes. The honesty hurt, but it helped. They'll say I took them from the hospital system because of Grandma's care. Likely. They'll say Marcus brought me here and I used it to get access. Yes. Annie laughed once, but there was no humor in it. They already wrote the story. Marcus ended the call and turned toward her. Then we write the timeline before they publish it. By noon, the story broke anyway. A business network posted it first, citing unnamed sources close to Whitmore governance. Young woman at center of Whitmore scandal, linked to confidential Phoenix 1 data. The article did not say Annie stole anything directly. It did not have to. It placed words carefully. Hospital access. Billionaire patronage. Terminated employee. Proprietary files. Ongoing review. By the second paragraph, Clara's old accusation appeared like a family trait. Daughter of late fellowship participant Clara Brooks, who was removed from a Whitmore program in 1999 following intellectual property concerns. Annie read the sentence in the hospital cafeteria while Samuel sat across from her with a paper cup of coffee gone cold. They make it sound inherited, she said. Samuel took the phone gently from her hand and turned it face down. That is the point. I didn't even know what Phoenix 1 was a week ago. They don't need people to believe you, understand it. They need people to believe you wanted something. Across the cafeteria, 2 women in business clothes looked at Annie and then looked away. One whispered. Annie could feel the story moving through the room faster than she could correct it. Marcus entered with Dr. Marsh and Lydia Grant. Dr. Marsh's face was set hard enough to cut wire. I traced the file access, she said without sitting. Temporary hospital admin credentials were used to download a decoy folder labeled Phoenix 1 Confidential. The folder was created yesterday afternoon. Annie frowned. Decoy? Yes. Real enough to look dangerous to press and board members. Useless for engineering. Someone wanted a file that could be planted without risking actual trade secrets. Samuel nodded. A prop. A weapon, Dr. Marsh said. Marcus looked at Lydia. And the credentials? Lydia opened a folder. Issued to a contractor supporting hospital donor systems. The request came through a consulting account tied to Caldwell Strategic Advisory. Annie looked at Marcus. That's Richard. One of his shells, Marcus said. Can we prove it? Not fully yet. Dr. Marsh sat down now, leaning forward. There's more. While everyone was chasing the planted drive, someone altered a Phoenix 1 revision log. The tertiary routing anomaly is now marked as reviewed and cleared. Marcus's eyes narrowed. By whom? Your credentials. The cafeteria noise seemed to thin. Marcus did not move. I did not clear anything. I know. You were in the hospital when the timestamp hit. Lydia has you on hospital entry logs and cameras. But Richard is building the case that your judgment is compromised, that you overrode engineering concerns while distracted by Annie and Clara. Annie pushed back from the table. So I'm not just the thief. I'm the reason he gets blamed. That appears to be the shape of it, Dr. Marsh said. Marcus looked at Annie. I'm sorry. She stood. Don't. Annie, don't say sorry like this is happening to you and spilling over onto me. It started with my mother. Marcus accepted that, but his face looked struck. Samuel rose too. What's Richard's next move? Lydia answered. Emergency board session tomorrow morning. He's asking for temporary suspension of Marcus's executive authority pending review. And me? Annie asked. Lydia hesitated. Say it. He'll recommend referral of the planted drive to law enforcement. Annie felt the old fear come, but it did not take her knees. Let him. Marcus shook his head. No. We need time to finish forensics. No, Annie said. We need him to think I'm scared enough to run. That's what he expected my mother to do. Samuel watched her carefully. What are you thinking? Annie looked at Dr. Marsh. Can you prove the drive was planted? With footage, access logs, and independent handling. Yes, but not by tomorrow morning unless the hospital footage is clean. Mrs. Alvarez appeared at the cafeteria entrance, as if summoned by the word footage. She walked to Annie and handed her a sealed envelope. Preliminary stills from the hallway camera, she said. Official copies go through hospital administration. But these are printed from preserved footage. I am allowed to provide them to the patient's designated family contact. Annie opened the envelope. The first image showed the man in the dark blazer entering Evelyn's room, while Annie and Samuel were in the hallway with Marcus. The second showed him leaving with Annie's tote folded under his arm. The third, from an elevator camera, caught his face. Lydia leaned in. I know him. Marcus turned. Who? Graham Voss. Richard Caldwell's private assistant. For the first time all day, Annie smiled. It was not a happy smile. He sent a man to steal a bag from a hospital room, she said, and the hospital caught him. Samuel tapped the photo. Not enough for the whole war. Enough for the next battle. Marcus straightened. Tomorrow's board meeting. Annie folded the photos back into the envelope. I'm going. No, Marcus said immediately. Yes. They'll try to humiliate you. They already did. They'll call you a thief. They already did. He stopped. Annie looked him in the eye. My mother spent her life being judged in rooms she wasn't allowed to enter. I'm not letting them do that to her again. Samuel's expression softened with something like pride. Dr. Marsh nodded once. Then we prepare. That evening, they gathered in a small hospital family room. Evelyn insisted on being wheeled in, wrapped in a blanket, with her oxygen tubing in place, and her attitude fully intact. Samuel spread the evidence across the table. Helen Carter's mail logs, copies of the notebook pages. Dr. Marsh's technical summary, the lighter note, the photos of Graham Voss, the patient assistance paperwork showing no debt or non-disclosure, and the timeline. Marcus stood apart at first until Evelyn pointed at a chair. Sit down, she said. Hovering is for ghosts and guilty men. He sat. For hours they put the story in order. Date. Document. Witness. Motive. Annie wrote headings in a spiral notebook borrowed from a nurse. Clara's work. Letters blocked. False accusation. Phoenix 1. Planted drive. Richard's motive. Near midnight, Evelyn reached for Annie's hand. You don't have to be made of iron tomorrow, she said. I know. No, you don't. You think if you shake, they win. Let me tell you something. Courage shakes. Cowardice hides. Annie held her grandmother's hand, then looked at Marcus. He said quietly, I will stand beside you. Not in front. Good, Annie said. Because if they ask who I am, I'm answering for myself. The next morning, Annie dressed in the same blue blouse she had worn to meet Dr. Marsh. It was not expensive, but it was clean. Samuel drove her to Whitmore Tower, with Marcus's sedan behind them and Lydia following in a third car. When the tower rose ahead, glass catching the morning sun, Annie felt her breath tighten. Samuel parked at the curb. Last chance to stay outside. Annie looked up at the building that had swallowed her mother's name and polished its teeth afterward. No, she said. She picked up Clara's notebook and stepped out. The lobby of Whitmore Tower was colder than the street outside. Glass walls rose 3 stories above Annie's head, and the floor was polished so brightly she could see the shape of herself in it. An 18-year-old black girl in a blue blouse, holding her dead mother's notebook like it was both shield and evidence. People turned as Marcus entered behind her. Their eyes went first to him, then to Annie, then to Samuel Reed walking at her side with a folder under his arm and the look of a man who had spent his life remembering details others tried to bury. At the security desk, a young man in a gray jacket looked at Annie and Samuel before he looked at Marcus. "Visitors need to sign in," Marcus said. "They are with me." The guard's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore, but Mr. Caldwell's office sent a restricted access notice this morning. All non-board personnel must be pre-cleared for the executive floors." Annie almost smiled. Richard had started before they even reached the elevator. Marcus leaned toward the desk. He did not raise his voice. "Then clear them." The guard swallowed. "Sir, I don't have authority to override legal. You have authority to call upstairs and tell them Marcus Whitmore is standing in his own lobby with guests who will be going to the executive floor." The guard reached for the phone. Annie touched Marcus's sleeve. He looked down, surprised by the contact. "Don't make them polite because you're angry," she said quietly. "Make them put the refusal in writing." Samuel nodded once. "Good." Marcus turned back to the guard. "Please print the restricted access notice and the name of the person who issued it." The guard's face changed. Men who hid behind procedure disliked being asked to document it. He typed quickly, made a call, listened, then hung up with less confidence than before. "Executive access approved," he said. "And the notice?" Marcus asked. "I'll have it sent. Now." A printer behind the desk hummed. Annie watched the page slide out. The guard handed it over. "Issued by Office of Richard Caldwell, Senior Counsel. Reason: reputational risk. Pending internal review." Samuel took a photo of it with his old digital camera. "Thank you," Annie said to the guard. He blinked, embarrassed. "Yes, ma'am." In the elevator, nobody spoke until the doors closed. Marcus stood on one side, Annie in the middle, Samuel on the other. Lydia Grant behind them with 2 binders pressed to her chest. The numbers climbed in silence. Samuel said, "Remember the order." Annie nodded. "Date, document, witness, motive, and breathe," Lydia added. Annie looked at her. Lydia gave a small shrug. "I'm legal support, not heartless." The elevator opened onto the executive floor. It smelled like leather, coffee, and flowers that had been replaced before they had time to wilt. A receptionist stood as Marcus approached, but her gaze kept slipping to Annie's notebook. "Boardroom is ready, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Who is present?" "Board members. Mr. Caldwell, Miss Whitmore, Dr. Marsh, outside counsel, and a representative from Meridian Capital." Marcus stopped. "Meridian has no place in an internal governance meeting." The receptionist looked trapped. Mr. Caldwell said they were relevant to contingency planning. Annie heard Samuel exhale through his nose. Marcus's voice hardened. Of course he did. The boardroom doors were tall, dark wood, and heavy enough to make entering feel like an announcement. When Marcus opened them, conversation stopped. 12 people sat around a long table. Most were older, white, and dressed in the quiet colors of wealth. Richard Caldwell stood near a screen at the far end, silver-haired, neat, and calm. Beside him sat Victoria Whitmore, Marcus's mother, her posture perfect, her face unreadable. Dr. Eleanor Marsh sat apart from them with a tablet in front of her, and no patience in her expression. Annie felt every eye land on her. Richard smiled without warmth. "Marcus, I was not informed Miss Brooks would attend." Annie stepped forward before Marcus could answer. "That's because nobody asked me." A few board members shifted. Richard's eyes moved over her clothes, her notebook, her face. "This is a sensitive corporate matter. It may be kinder to spare you from proceedings you may not fully understand." Samuel made a low sound behind her. Annie held the notebook tighter. "My mother spent her life being discussed in rooms she wasn't allowed to enter. I'm not standing outside while you do it again." The smile left Richard's face for half a second. Then he turned to the board. This is precisely the emotional volatility I warned about. Marcus walked to his chair but did not sit. Proceed carefully. Richard, I intend to. Richard pressed a remote, and the screen displayed Annie's blurred photo from the hotel corridor. We are here because a pattern has emerged that affects company governance, public trust, and the integrity of Phoenix One. A terminated hotel employee returned, or claims to have returned, a personal item belonging to our chairman. She then alleged a connection between that item, Mr. Whitmore's tattoo, and her deceased mother, Clara Brooks, a former fellowship participant removed under intellectual property concerns in 1999. Annie felt the phrase hit the room, removed under intellectual property concerns. Clean words for a dirty accusation. Richard continued, since then, Miss Brooks has received medical assistance arranged through channels connected to Mr. Whitmore, has obtained access to company-linked individuals, and was found in possession of a device containing confidential Phoenix One material. That device was planted, Marcus said. Richard turned to him. That is your claim. It is supported by hospital footage, Lydia said, opening a binder. Richard did not look at her. We will come to that. My concern is broader. Marcus has failed to disclose a deeply personal history with Clara Brooks, whose name now appears in allegations against this company. He has involved her daughter in sensitive matters while Phoenix One faces technical instability. He has allowed judgment to become entangled with guilt. A board member, a woman with cropped white hair, looked at Annie. Miss Brooks, did you come here seeking compensation? No. Employment? No. Recognition? Annie paused. For my mother, yes. Richard seized it. There it is. A personal claim against company intellectual property. Annie looked at him. No, Mr. Caldwell. A truth claim against stolen credit. The room went still. Victoria Whitmore's eyes flicked toward Annie for the first time with something sharper than dislike. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. Richard placed both hands on the table. Young lady, you should be very careful using words like stolen in this room. Annie's pulse beat hard in her ears. You called my mother a thief because you knew the world would believe that faster than it would believe she was brilliant. No one spoke. Dr. Marsh leaned back in her chair, watching Richard now instead of Annie. Richard's face remained controlled, but the skin along his jaw tightened. That is a rehearsed line, not evidence. Samuel stepped forward. Then let's discuss evidence. Richard's eyes cut to him. Mr. Reed, you are not on the agenda. Neither was the truth in 1999, but here we are. Marcus finally sat, not at the head of the table, but beside Annie's empty chair. He pulled the chair out and looked at her, not ordering, offering. Annie sat because standing was no longer the point. Being present was. Lydia handed copies of the hospital photos to the board secretary. First, the planted drive. These stills from Street Catherine Medical Center show Graham Voss, assistant to Mr. Caldwell, entering Evelyn Brooks's hospital room and leaving with Miss Brooks's tote. The drive was found inside the bag after it was recovered 2 floors below. A murmur moved around the table. Richard barely glanced at the images. Graham was at the hospital to coordinate donor system access. Marcus said, in my guest's hospital room? Apparently a mistake. Samuel said, mistakes don't hide bags behind trash cans. Dr. Marsh spoke next. The files on the drive were decoys created the previous afternoon. They were labeled as confidential Phoenix One material, but contained no usable engineering data. Their value was reputational, not technical. A board member frowned. You're saying the drive was designed to look incriminating? Yes, Dr. Marsh said. That is exactly what I'm saying. Richard's voice cooled. Dr. Marsh, your technical review is ongoing. I caution against speculation. She looked at him. I caution against sabotage disguised as governance. That shifted the room more than Annie expected. Dr. Marsh had authority here. Not warmth, not charm, but the kind of earned weight that came from knowing the machine better than the men selling it. Lydia moved to the next set of documents. Second, correspondence records. Helen Carter, former administrative secretary for the Whitmore Fellowship, provided copies of mail ledger entries from 1,000 999, and 2000. 31 letters from Clara Brooks to Marcus Whitmore. 26 letters from Marcus Whitmore to Clara Brooks. All marked for RC review. A board member asked, "RC?" Samuel answered before Richard could. "Richard Caldwell." Richard laughed softly. "A mail ledger from a frightened retiree and photocopies with no chain of custody?" Annie opened the notebook and removed a copy, not the original, of Clara's note from the lighter. "Then explain this," she said. Marcus looked at her, and she saw the warning in his eyes. This was the piece they had planned to hold until chapter, until later, until enough pressure. But Richard had spent 23 years trusting people to wait politely. Annie was done waiting. She read aloud, steady enough to surprise herself. "Marcus, if this ever reaches you, don't trust the report. Don't trust Richard. The Phoenix framework is mine, and the third path is the key. If they burn the lab, the proof is not in the lab anymore." Victoria Whitmore's face lost color. Richard said, "Where did you get that?" Annie looked at him. "From the lighter my mother gave Marcus. The one you thought was just sentimental." Marcus slowly placed the silver lighter on the table. Every eye followed it. For the first time since Annie had entered, Richard Caldwell looked at an object as if it had no right to exist. Dr. Marsh stood. "And the technical contents of Clara Brooks's notebook align with early Phoenix 1 architecture, including the tertiary routing path currently experiencing anomalies." The white-haired board member turned to Richard. "Why was none of this disclosed?" Richard recovered quickly. "Because none of it has been authenticated. We are watching an emotional performance built around a tragic family story." Annie stood again. "No," she said. "You are watching what happens when the girl you thought would be too poor, too scared, and too black to enter this room walks in with copies." Silence fell so hard it seemed to press against the glass walls. Marcus looked at her. Not with pity, not with surprise, but with something like pride, held carefully back, because he knew he had not earned the right to display it too freely. Richard turned to the board, voice sharp now. "I move that Marcus Whitmore be temporarily suspended from executive authority pending external review, and that Miss Brooks be referred to law enforcement regarding possession of proprietary data." Before anyone could respond, the boardroom doors opened. Mrs. Alvarez from Street Catherine entered with a hospital administrator and a uniformed security supervisor behind her. Lydia looked startled, then relieved. Mrs. Alvarez held up a sealed packet. "I apologize for the interruption, but since this company's counsel has cited events at my hospital in this proceeding, Street, Catherine is formally submitting preserved footage, visitor logs, and a signed incident report. It confirms unauthorized entry into Miss Evelyn Brooks's room by Graham Voss, removal of Annie Brooks's personal bag, and recovery of that bag with an added device." Richard's face went flat. Mrs. Alvarez looked directly at him. "Hospitals keep records too, Mr. Caldwell." Annie sat down slowly. Not because she was weak, but because for the first time all morning, the room had tilted away from her and toward the man who deserved its weight. Samuel leaned close and murmured, "That's the first crack." Annie looked at the lighter on the table, then at her mother's notebook. "No," she whispered. "The first crack was Mama. We're just hearing it now." The boardroom did not move for several seconds after Mrs. Alvarez spoke. Even the people who had spent their lives pretending surprise was beneath them had no clean expression ready. The sealed packet in her hand looked plain, almost dull, but Annie understood now that plain things could be dangerous when they carried the truth. Richard Caldwell recovered first. Men like him always did. His face settled back into calm, though the calm had lost some of its polish. "This is highly irregular," he said. Mrs. Alvarez did not blink. "So is a private assistant entering a patient's room and removing a visitor's bag. I am not aware that Mr. Voss removed anything. That is why we brought footage." The hospital administrator placed the packet on the table in front of the board secretary. Lydia stepped forward and asked that it be entered into the record. The white-haired board member, whose nameplate read Margaret Sloan, nodded to the secretary. "Enter it," she said. Richard turned toward her. "Margaret, with respect, this proceeding is not a trial." "No," Margaret replied. "But apparently someone thought it was a good place to present accusations against an 18-year-old girl." Evidence seems appropriate. Annie looked at her, surprised. Margaret did not soften, but she did not look away either. Dr. Marsh stood again, tablet in hand. Since we're entering records, I have something to add. Richard's head turned sharply. Eleanor. She ignored the warning. At 9:42 last night, Marcus Whitmore's executive credentials were used to mark the Phoenix 1 tertiary routing anomaly as reviewed and cleared. At 9:42 last night, Mr. Whitmore was on camera at Street Catherine Medical Center, outside Miss Evelyn Brooks's room. Lydia Grant has the time-stamped footage. Hospital systems confirm it. He could not have made that entry. Marcus's voice was quiet. Who did? Dr. Marsh tapped the tablet. The login was his. The device was not. The device fingerprint matches a terminal assigned to Legal Conference Room 12. Every head turned toward Richard. He gave a small, controlled sigh. Shared terminals can be accessed by multiple employees. This proves nothing except poor internal controls. Samuel spoke from behind Annie. Funny how every poor control points toward your hallway. Richard looked at him with open irritation now. Mr. Reed, your history with this company ended decades ago, and yours should have. A murmur moved around the room. Richard's eyes sharpened. Careful. Samuel smiled without warmth. I've been careful for 23 years. Didn't help Clara Brooks much. Annie felt those words settle behind her like a hand on her back. Lydia opened another binder. We also obtained preliminary ownership information on the gray pickup seen outside Helen Carter's home after she provided the mail ledger copies. The vehicle is registered to Southern Administrative Leasing. That company invoices Caldwell Strategic Advisory for transportation services. Richard's fingers rested flat on the table. Only the tips pressed harder. Marcus looked at him. You had Helen watched. I have no knowledge of that. You had Annie threatened. I certainly did not. You had Graham plant a device in her bag. No. You used my credentials. That is an outrageous accusation. Marcus leaned forward. Then let us call Graham Voss. For the first time, Richard said nothing. Margaret Sloane looked toward the board secretary. Where is Mr. Voss? The secretary checked her tablet, nervous now. He was in the building this morning. His badge shows he exited through the parking level at 8:16. Convenient, Samuel said. Dr. Marsh's voice cut through the room. There is more. Richard turned to her with the first visible flash of anger. You are exceeding the scope of your review. I am the chief engineer of a project you tried to clear without engineering approval. I will decide the scope of my review. She touched the screen and sent a file to the board display. This is the current Phoenix 1 failure pattern. Under ordinary simulation, the system holds. Under full demonstration load with stage stress, the tertiary path lags, reroutes late, and produces a visible performance drop. The screen changed to a scan from Clara's notebook. The broken Phoenix appeared beside a set of numbers. Dr. Marsh continued, This is a page from Clara Brooks's notebook. The notation predates the Phoenix 1 program and identifies the same vulnerability in what she called the third path. Annie watched the board members lean forward. For the first time, they were not looking at her uniform, her age, her skin, or the scandal headline. They were looking at Clara's work. Dr. Marsh changed the screen again. And this is the note recovered from the hidden compartment in the lighter Marcus Whitmore has carried for more than 2 decades. Richard spoke quickly. The authenticity of that note has not been established. No, Dr. Marsh said, but the technical statement in it has. Marcus stood and placed the lighter at the center of the table. Clara gave me this the night before she was accused. I never knew what was inside. That failure is mine. But the contents are now documented, photographed, and in independent custody. Annie glanced at him. He had said, failure without flinching. Not mistake. Not misunderstanding. Failure. Victoria Whitmore had not spoken since Annie entered the room. She sat very still, gloved hands folded in front of her, eyes fixed on the Phoenix drawing on the screen. When Marcus mentioned the night before Clara was accused, something in Victoria's face shifted, not enough for forgiveness, but enough for memory. Margaret Sloane turned to Richard. Mr. Caldwell, did your office route correspondence between Clara Brooks and Marcus Whitmore? I would need to review historical records, Lydia said. Helen Carter's ledger shows RC review on 57 pieces of correspondence. Photocopies, Richard said. Unverified. Mrs. Alvarez, still near the door, spoke dryly. You dislike records when you didn't write them. Annie almost smiled. Margaret looked at Marcus. Did you write to Clara Brooks? Yes. Did you receive her letters? No. Did you receive a letter ending the relationship? Yes. Do you now believe it was genuine? Marcus looked at the lighter, then at Annie. No. Margaret turned to Annie. Miss Brooks, did your mother ever tell you about Marcus Whitmore? No, Annie said. She drew the phoenix. She kept the notebook. She worked until her body gave out. That was the story I grew up with. Victoria closed her eyes. Richard seized the opening, and that is tragic. But tragedy is not proof. We are allowing grief to stand in for authentication. Annie stood before anyone could stop her. No, she said. You keep calling this grief because grief is easy for you to dismiss. My mother's handwriting is not grief. The mail logs are not grief. The hospital footage is not grief. The forged access record is not grief. Doctor, Marcia's analysis is not grief. You just want everything that hurts you to sound emotional, because then you can treat it like it doesn't belong in a boardroom. Silence followed. This time Annie did not sit down. Richard looked at her with something bare and cold. You have been coached. I have been raised, Annie said. There's a difference. Samuel lowered his head, hiding a small smile. Then the boardroom doors opened again. An older woman stepped inside with Lydia's assistant supporting her elbow. Helen Carter wore a beige cardigan and looked terrified. But she walked in on her own feet. Marcus turned, stunned. Annie did too. Helen looked at Richard first and almost stopped. Then her eyes found Annie. I'm sorry, she said, voice thin but clear. I should have come years ago. Richard's face hardened. This is absurd. Margaret Sloane lifted a hand. Let her speak. Helen moved to the end of the table. Lydia helped her sit. But Helen remained upright, both hands gripping her purse. I worked as administrative secretary in the Whitmore Fellowship office in 1999, she said. All correspondence involving Clara Brooks after the lab incident was routed through Mr. Caldwell's office. I logged the letters. I saw them placed in legal hold boxes. I saw 2 final letters prepared for delivery, one to Mr. Whitmore and one to Miss Brooks. The language did not match either of them. Richard stood. Mrs. Carter, you are making serious allegations based on memories from 23 years ago. Helen looked at him, shaking now but not stopping. No, I am making serious allegations based on the ledger I copied, because I was ashamed. She opened her purse and removed a small cassette recorder, the old kind with a cloudy plastic window. Samuel's eyebrows rose. Well, I'll be. Helen looked at Annie. Your mother came to the office after she was escorted out. Mr. Caldwell spoke to her in the records room. I was outside with a tape recorder because I had been asked to transcribe donor remarks later that day. I never meant to record him, but I did. Richard's face drained of color. Marcus took one step forward. Helen. She placed the recorder on the table. I kept it because I was a coward. Then I kept it because I was afraid. Today I brought it because I am old. And fear is a poor thing to die holding. Lydia produced a small digital transfer device from her bag, as if she had prepared for every century at once. With the board's permission, Margaret nodded. The tape clicked. Static filled the room. Then Clara Brooks's voice came through, younger than Annie had ever heard it, tired but unbroken. You can take my badge, Mr. Caldwell, but you cannot make my hands forget what they built. Annie's breath caught. Then Richard's younger voice answered, smooth even then. Miss Brooks, brilliance without ownership is merely assistance. The foundation owns the project. The family owns the fellowship. You own whatever dignity remains if you leave quietly. Victoria covered her mouth. Clara's voice sharpened. Marcus will not believe this. Richard gave a soft laugh on the tape. Marcus will believe what reaches him. No one moved. The tape hissed on. And if I'm carrying his child? Clara asked. The room stopped breathing. Richard's reply came cold and clear. Then I suggest you consider whether that child's life will be improved by dragging it through a scandal your word cannot win. Annie sat down because the floor seemed too far away. Marcus gripped the table with both hands, his face white. On the tape, Clara spoke one last time. You are not God, Mr. Caldwell. No, Richard answered. Just the man holding the door. Lydia stopped the tape. For several seconds, the only sound was Annie trying not to break in front of them. Marcus turned to Richard. The billionaire's voice was low, stripped of polish, money, and every layer he had worn for decades. "You knew," he said. Richard did not answer. "You knew Clara was pregnant." Victoria began to cry silently. Richard straightened his jacket. "That recording lacks context." Samuel's voice was hard. "So did the life you let that child live without her father." Marcus moved as if he might cross the room. Annie stood, stepping into his path. Not to protect Richard, but to stop Marcus from handing him another story. "Don't," she said. Marcus looked at her, breathing hard. "He wants you angry," Annie said. "Let the record be angry." That reached him. Slowly, Marcus stepped back. Margaret Sloane looked at the other board members. "I believe the motion before us should change." Richard turned toward her. "Margaret, no," she said. "You have spoken enough." Dr. Marsh added, "And while we are changing motions, I recommend immediate suspension of the Phoenix 1 demonstration, full preservation of engineering logs, and external forensic review of all legal interventions connected to the project," Lydia said. "Outside counsel is prepared to notify federal authorities regarding potential securities fraud, evidence tampering, and corporate sabotage." Richard gave one last attempt at control. "You are all being manipulated by a staged emotional ambush." Annie looked at him across the table. She saw no monster with horns, no villain from a bedtime story, just an old man in an expensive suit who had trusted that the world would always believe his paperwork over a black woman's truth. "My mother was right," Annie said. Richard's eyes fixed on her. "You were never God," she said. "You were just standing in the doorway." Margaret Sloane called for a vote. It was not close. Richard Caldwell was suspended from all duties pending external investigation. His access was revoked before he left the room. Building security, not his own assistant, escorted him out. As he passed Annie, he paused as if to say something, but Samuel stepped beside her, and Marcus stood on the other side. For once, Richard Caldwell found no open door. When the boardroom closed behind him, nobody applauded. It was not that kind of victory. Clara was still gone. Annie's childhood was still altered. Marcus had still carried proof for 23 years without knowing it. Evelyn still lay in a hospital bed because poverty and fear had worn her body down. But Clara's voice had entered the room, and this time everyone had heard it. By the time Richard Caldwell was escorted out, Annie felt no triumph, only a deep exhaustion that made the boardroom lights seem too bright. People began speaking at once, using words like preservation order, outside counsel, emergency disclosure, forensic audit. Their voices overlapped until Clara's voice from the tape felt far away again. Annie closed her mother's notebook and held it against her chest. Marcus turned to her. "Are you all right?" "No," Annie said. He nodded as if that was the only honest answer available. "Do you want to leave?" "I want to see my grandmother." Marcus looked toward the board, where Margaret Sloane was already directing the secretary to suspend Richard's access to every system, archive, and legal file. Dr. Marsh was on the phone with her engineering team, ordering them to freeze Phoenix 1 logs and halt the demonstration. Victoria Whitmore sat very still, her eyes fixed on the table where the lighter remained. "Go," Margaret said, noticing Annie's hesitation. "We have enough to begin. Miss Brooks, your mother's name will not disappear from this record." Annie looked at her. "It disappeared once." Margaret accepted the rebuke. "Then we will put it back in ink this time." Samuel walked out with Annie on one side and Marcus on the other. No one stopped them at the elevator. No receptionist asked for clearance. No guard questioned the notebook in Annie's arms. The building seemed different now, not kinder, but less certain of itself. That was something. In the elevator, Marcus stared at the silver lighter in his hand. He had taken it from the table after Lydia photographed it again and sealed Clara's note in a protective sleeve. He held it carefully, no longer like a keepsake, but like a thing that had survived him. Annie watched him. "You're going to blame yourself forever, aren't you?" His eyes lifted. "Some things deserve to be carried. Carrying it won't bring her back. No. It won't give me 18 years. No." The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Annie stepped out first. "Then don't make guilt your memorial to her. She deserves better than that." Marcus did not answer until they reached the car. "What does she deserve?" Annie looked at the glass tower rising behind them. her name on what she built, the truth in every file that called her a thief, and girls like her getting the chance she lost. Marcus looked at Samuel, then back at Annie. Then that is where we begin. At Street Catherine, Evelyn was awake, sitting up against too many pillows, scolding a nurse about the coffee. "This isn't coffee," she said. "This is brown water with hospital ambition." The nurse laughed as she adjusted the monitor. "Your granddaughter is back, Miss Brooks. Maybe she can negotiate with dietary." Evelyn turned and saw Annie. She saw Samuel. Then she saw Marcus standing behind them with his face changed by whatever had happened in that boardroom. "Well?" Evelyn asked. Annie sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. For a moment she could not speak. Samuel answered softly. Clara's voice was heard. Evelyn closed her eyes. Annie said, "Helen had a tape. Richard admitted enough without meaning to. He knew Mama was pregnant. He knew the letters wouldn't reach Marcus. He told her Marcus would believe what reached him." Evelyn's hand trembled in Annie's. "And the board?" Evelyn asked. "Richard is suspended. Phoenix 1 is frozen. They're bringing in outside investigators." Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at Marcus. "And you?" Marcus stepped closer, but not too close. "I am going to do what I should have done 23 years ago. I am going to stay with the truth until it is finished." Evelyn studied him. "Truth doesn't finish. It just stops being buried." "Yes, ma'am," he said. That small answer broke something in Evelyn's face. She looked away, but Annie saw the tears. The official statement came 3 days later. It did not say everything. Lawyers never allowed everything at first. But it said enough to change the air. Whitmore Industries announced the suspension of Richard Caldwell, the preservation of all records tied to the 1999 Whitmore Fellowship incident, an external investigation into Phoenix 1's origins, and a formal review of historical claims against Clara Denise Brooks. The old articles began to change, then new ones replaced them. Former fellowship student may have originated Phoenix 1 framework. Internal records challenge, decades-old accusation against Clara Brooks. Whitmore board suspends senior counsel amid evidence tampering probe. Annie did not read the comments this time. Samuel told her that was not avoidance. That was hygiene. A week later, independent digital forensics cleared Annie of the planted drive. Hospital footage, access logs, and Graham Voss's abandoned credentials left little room for Richard's version. Graham turned himself in through an attorney and, by the end of the month, began talking. Men like Graham rarely went to prison alone if they could trade a larger name for a smaller sentence. Richard's fall did not happen in one dramatic shove. It happened in documents, subpoenas, frozen accounts, closed office doors, and people suddenly remembering things they had claimed to forget. Caldwell Strategic Advisory was tied to Meridian Capital. Meridian had been preparing a discounted acquisition offer for Phoenix 1 in the event of a failed demonstration. Dr. Marsh's audit showed the tertiary path had been altered deliberately. Clara's old warning had been right twice. The first time, no one listened. The second time, her daughter made sure they had to. Marcus arranged nothing for Annie without asking after that. When Street Catherine recommended a longer cardiac care plan for Evelyn, Annie reviewed every document with Samuel before signing. The cost went through a named charitable medical fund with no non-disclosure agreement, no release of claims, and no debt assigned to the Brooks family. Evelyn read the papers too, glasses low on her nose. "This rich man paperwork looks cleaner than most," she said. Samuel nodded. "Because I scared the dirt off it." Marcus, sitting across the hospital room, almost smiled. Evelyn pointed at him. "Don't get comfortable." "No, ma'am." But she let him bring her tea the next day. Real tea, not hospital coffee. That was how forgiveness began with Evelyn Brooks. Not with speeches, but with one permitted errand. The DNA test came later, because Annie insisted it would not be used as proof of anything except biology. Marcus agreed. When the result arrived, Annie opened it alone in the hospital chapel while Marcus waited outside. Probability of paternity: 99.999%. She stared at the number for a long time. It did not change her memories. It did not put Marcus in the seats at school ceremonies he never knew existed. It did not erase Clara's double shifts, Evelyn's fear, or Annie's years of wondering why some questions made adults go quiet. When she came out, Marcus stood. Annie handed him the paper. He read it, then lowered his head. His shoulders moved once, not quite a sob, not quite a breath. "I cannot give you back the years I didn't know about," he said, "but I can spend every year I have left making sure you never stand alone again." Annie looked at him. "I don't need a billionaire to rescue me. I need a father who tells the truth." Marcus folded the paper carefully. "Then that is where I'll begin." She did not call him Dad. Not that day. Not for many days after. Marcus did not ask. He showed up instead. He sat in waiting rooms. He listened when Evelyn corrected his understanding of Clara. He brought documents before decisions, not after. He learned Annie took her coffee with too much sugar when she was tired and none when she was angry. He learned not to send cars without asking. He learned that apology was not an event. It was a habit. 6 months later, Whitmore Industries amended the official Phoenix 1 history. Clara Denise Brooks was named as the originator of the core recovery framework. Her old accusation was formally withdrawn. The company issued an apology that Annie helped edit until it stopped sounding like a brand protecting itself and started sounding like people admitting harm. Phoenix 1 was renamed the Clara Brooks Phoenix Initiative. A year after Annie returned the lighter, the Clara Brooks Phoenix Center opened in Southwest Atlanta, not downtown, not in a polished district where donors could congratulate themselves over catered shrimp. Annie chose a renovated brick building near a bus line, a grocery store, and New Hope Baptist. There were classrooms, a small engineering lab, a computer room, and a workshop with tools sized for young hands and serious dreams. On opening day, Evelyn arrived in a wheelchair she claimed she did not need. Samuel pushed it anyway. Marcus walked beside them carrying a box of programs because Evelyn had told him rich men should occasionally carry something useful. Dr. Marsh stood near the lab, already explaining circuits to 3 girls who had ignored the ribbon ceremony completely. Annie stood before the wall, where Clara's broken phoenix had been enlarged and framed. Beneath it were the words Clara had written years ago. "Broken wings, still remember the sky." For a moment, Annie could almost see her mother at the edge of the room, younger than illness, sleeves rolled up, pencil behind her ear, watching girls crowd around workbenches that no one could take from them. Marcus came to stand beside Annie. He wore the tattoo uncovered now. "I wish she could see this," he said. Annie kept her eyes on the phoenix. "Maybe the point is that they can." He looked toward the girls. "Yes," he said. "Maybe it is." Near the display case, a little black girl with beaded braids pointed at the silver lighter resting beside Clara's notebook. "Miss Annie?" she asked. Did that little lighter really change everything? The room grew quieter in Annie's mind, though people were still talking around her. She looked at the lighter, at the notebook, at Evelyn watching from her wheelchair, at Samuel standing with his hat in his hands, at Marcus waiting beside her without trying to answer first. Annie knelt so the girl did not have to look up. "No, sweetheart," she said. "My mother's truth changed everything. The lighter just helped it find its way back." The girl considered that, then nodded with the seriousness only children can give to things adults nearly destroyed. Outside, afternoon sun fell across the center's front steps. People lingered instead of leaving. Church ladies carried foil-covered trays inside. A retired teacher offered to volunteer twice a week. A father asked whether his daughter could join even if she had never built anything before. Dr. Marsh answered from across the room. "That's what beginning is for." Annie smiled. Later, when the crowd thinned, Marcus found her by the display case. He had the lighter in his hand. "Do you want to keep it?" he asked. Annie looked at it. For so long, it had been his memory. Clara's proof, Richard's fear, and the spark that had opened all of this. But now it belonged to something larger. "No," she said. "Leave it here." Marcus placed it back beside the notebook. Then he stepped away, giving her a moment alone with her mother. Annie touched the glass lightly. She thought of Clara writing letters that never arrived, drawing wings inside sorrow, hiding proof in the one object love might preserve. She thought of Evelyn lying to protect a child, of Marcus failing and then staying, of Samuel keeping old notes because guilt sometimes becomes duty if it lives long enough. Justice had not been fair. It had arrived late, after sickness, poverty, shame, and loss had already taken their share. but it had arrived carrying Clara's name. And for Annie, that was not the end of grief. It was the beginning of breathing without bowing her head. When she walked outside, Marcus and Evelyn were arguing gently near the curb about whether she needed help getting into the car. "I have managed 72 years without being lifted like luggage," Evelyn said. Marcus held the door open. "Yes, ma'am. Don't, yes, ma'am me unless you plan to obey. I'm learning." Annie stood on the steps and watched them. The city moving beyond the street. Buses sighing at the corner. Church bells ringing somewhere in the distance. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like a bill coming due. It felt like a door. And this time, Annie Brooks walked through it carrying her mother's name in the light. The lesson of Annie's story is that truth may be buried by power, money, and prejudice, but it does not disappear. Sometimes justice arrives late, after good people have suffered and names have been dragged through shame. Yet one brave voice can still bring the truth back into the light. Annie teaches us that dignity is not given by the rich, the powerful, or the respected. It is carried by those who refuse to let lies define the people they love. Her mother's life reminds us that talent, love, and honor can be stolen for a time, but never forever when someone is brave enough to remember, speak, and stand. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.